Damn it.
I
mean, I have absolutely no idea what it could be like, or if
Oh,
that
it
is
just said. Oh, never mind. It's just starting. Crap.
yeah, I got the notification. Let's see.
Oh, now it's live.
All
I
right,
see it.
we are live. Can
actually
anyone in the chat hear us?
All right. I can hear it.
Can you
Yep.
guys can hear us in the?
chat's
Okay,
working.
cool. Okay, um, that took a long time to get to work, and I have no idea how I fixed it either. So, just to double check, can everyone in the chat hear us? Someone can't hear us. Can anyone hear us?
I can hear us.
Okay,
and
so
my voice sounds crooked.
So someone can hear us, and then someone in the chat can't hear us. I have a feeling the first 10 minutes of the stream's going to be troubleshooting. So, okay, someone can hear us and someone can't. So it might be a problem on their end and not our end. All right, so I guess we're free to start then.
Well, welcome everyone. This is now the Four Swords podcast, and
Hello there.
I'm Windwanker.
I am here.
There's Nephy, there's Deox, and this is the new one, Birbddha. And we're here to
Birbddha, I think is how it's
talk about the language of
Let's call
symbolism.
me Birbddha.
All right, this is already a little chaotic, so let's try and make some order out of this, because we are definitely going to be talking about chaos and order a lot.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I'm
I
not
hope
even.
you guys like Jungian philosophy, because you're going to get plenty of it right here.
I'm not even
And
sure where
new
the heck
people
to
who-
start. We have
Welcome to the
so much to
jungle,
talk
kiddos.
about.
I can hear you when my internet isn't hiccuping. Okay, that's good. That's good. Thanks, Isaac.
Okay, so
Well,
it looks like it's working then. That's good. Yeah, I apologize to
Well,
everyone.
no.
I just spent the last half hour trying to get it to go live, and it just refused to work. And then it magically started working.
Yeah, it was a mess.
Yeah, but
yeah,
anyway, so where the heck should we start? I have a feeling we're gonna go on for quite a few hours with this. We've been talking about these topics for like the last almost 2 weeks now, like almost every day on our Discord.
Yeah, it's been a
I think a
it's
good
been
place
a
to
very
start.
heavy topic.
I think a good place to start is to maybe clear up some of the terminology that we're going to be using, so that people don't, we don't leave them hanging.
First,
And
I
then
guess
start
let's
talking. When we actually get to the stuff, they
Alright.
actually understand what what the different terminology means.
So to start and illustrate this, if anyone can hear right now, a lot of what comes back to this is Carl Jungian philosophy, the idea that ideas and concepts exist in some meta-divine realm, and that instead of creating new ideas, we're drawing out these ideas from a sort of collective unconsciousness, that these ideas exist within this collective unconsciousness, and that we as people can draw from these ideas. That's basically what we're going to be talking about. If that sounds a little trippy, don't worry. We will hopefully be explaining how this relates to a fucking fan Zelda game.
Well, as I was gonna say, regardless of what we're about to say has any truth in reality, the point is our brains perceive the world this way, and every myth and religious story in all of history was written with this assumption. And Legend of Zelda is a myth, and I'm certain the creators of Zelda actually intended the games to be perceived like this. And after I've been listening to this stuff for like 2 or 3 weeks now, and like completely separate of Zelda. And the moment I started applying this to the Legend of Zelda, a lot of stuff about it, a lot of this lore confusion and stuff, all of a sudden started making sense. So and I've kind of hinted at it in the title of the podcast. I don't think Breath of the Wild and Skyward Sword is as bad as I did a little bit ago, but we'll get to that. Anyway,
This will come back to Zelda. We promise you this.
yes, this all ties to Zelda.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, all of this can seem pretty confusing, but I think a good analogy is, before you can start to explore the various themes and topics, you need to be equipped with the sort of symbolic language, and what that means is that you need to. There's some terminology that is too difficult to kind of explain every time, so you just apply the terminology in order to understand the thematic framework of how myth and religion works and how it's conveyed to the person.
It is incarnating ideas, really.
Whoever was
Hey,
just speaking, it came out all jumbled.
Yeah, Burb, you're coming off like a robot, which is my job, but hopefully
It's
the
Wind
internet
Waker's
isn't too
job.
bad. Yeah.
Beep boop. I'm actually a sentient robot trying to take over.
Well, you better get some better internet quality because
You need your voice modulator upgraded, you creature of the earth, you.
yeah, it's like yes, I am human. Want to go skateboard? Yeah. Hi, Iron Wolf. How you doing? But yeah, so the idea of like ideas already being pre-existing concepts is a idea in itself for a long time, and it's interesting that we've been discussing on how like the Zelda series draws from these sort of ancient literatures and ancient concepts. Whether they do this consciously or unconsciously is up for debate. Maybe Miyamoto is an expert, in mythology, or maybe or maybe he just like, I don't know, stares in the screen for a good amount of time and then just draws things out randomly. But either way, the idea is that he and other people who create Legend of Zelda, the ideas they end up paralleling a lot of existing myth. One of these is the idea of chaos, which is a German.
Yeah, I'll just broadly go over some of the components of this. Some of the things we'll be talking about is this idea of the Chaos Kampf, which is basically this infinite cycle of order and chaos kind of fighting each other to create reality or whatever. And then another concept we'll be talking about is the great trigger word principality, or a more modern word for that idea is archetype. And then the third concept I think we'll kind of be talking about is that time is actually cyclical and not linear, which is a really big thing, and it's really obvious that Zelda treats time that way, and all myths and all religions treat time that way, as a cycle, not a linear progression of events. But so should we start with the Chaos Kampf then? Because that's where this all started for me. I heard the story of Tiamat and Marduk, and I dived in a little deeper, and then it led me into all of this. So we should probably start with the Chaos Kampf.
Shoot.
Well, coming from a guy who has studied mythology, albeit kind of poorly, but attempting to. Chaos Kampf is the idea that creation and existence all centers around this conflict. That primordial order and primordial chaos have been in conflict since even before the concept of time, and that everything in existence is a facet to that battle. Depending on whether the religion is Western or Eastern, passive or more aggressive, the union between and conflict between order and chaos can be seen as more of a war or as sort of a transcendental, even sexual union between these two primordial forces. And oftentimes, more often than not, you can look this up, order is usually represented as a humanoid figure, usually male, but can sometimes be female, and chaos is usually represented as a dragonic serpentine figure, usually akin to a primordial reptile of sorts.
And it is everywhere. It is in Western religions and mythology. It's in Eastern religions and mythology. You can find cave paintings all the way back before any religion or myths existed. So this idea of order and chaos constantly fighting each other has been around since our earliest ancestors. It's like encoded in our DNA at this point.
Existed.
Yeah, it's like to rationalize. Like I while we've been discussing this, a lot of people get hung up in the fact that chaos is represented by a snake or a serpent or a dragon. Like it doesn't really matter what is the symbol for representing such a primordial force or concept. The thing that what's more important is that it's trying to articulate the concept to us, and in that case, in world history, and we have articulated that concept through serpents, very often than not, but it doesn't really matter. Like people have asked me, for example, why the serpent, and they get hung up in the details, like, yeah, but a snake is this and that, but that doesn't matter.
It's how we see the serpent.
Yeah, the serpent is just a symbol.
I actually think the snake or serpent is a pretty good symbol for chaos, because bringing this down to the material and biology, humans and birds are the only, as far as I know, they're the only two creatures on Earth that can actually detect and see the movement of a snake when it's moving. because of the way a snake moves. So in a way, it's kind of like saying, we actually are able to recognize chaos if we like look for it, and we're one of the only creatures that can do that, which is why we have civilization. So there's a biological component to this too.
Well, the serpent is viewed as sort of a transformative archetype too, which is very drawn close to chaos. In Korean mythology, the Imugi, which is a proto-dragon, can turn to a dragon whenever it's viewed as worthy or reaches a sort of adolescence. And snakes were viewed as immortal by many Chinese theologians and mythologies because they believe that each time a snake sheds its skin, it transitions from one life to the next. We know now that that's not the case, but that's how humans interpreted it, and that's why there's a lot of interpretations from Eastern to Western about serpents being these mystical creatures that are rooted in ancient knowledge, ancient powers, and ancient wisdom, which is funny because if you actually look at a real snake, many of them are very passive and silly,
I think why
Zoodles are a term.
Yeah, I think the reason though, like there's been a lot of debate within the academic community because it's a very glaring thing that come up time and time again. It doesn't, even though the setting you're exploring or studying is separated in time and space, it doesn't really matter because it shows up a lot of times. And a lot of scholars have debated why the serpent. And I think one of the more dominating theories is because the serpent is very alien to humans and mammals as a whole. And this is
it's our opposite too.
Yeah, and it's not even related to Chaos Free, just to poke fun at it.
They don't have
exactly. But to poke fun at it, with the entire reptilian conspiracy, there's not. I don't think. But I don't think there's a coincidence that the reptilian was chosen as this great. This great other because they are so alien to mammals. They are, and I think that serpent as a potential threat to us humans is a very primordial fear, and
so it probably it definitely has some sort of biological component to it, or like a natural, like the dynamic between mammals and reptiles, or specifically snakes, because even amongst reptiles, snakes are a weird sort of anomaly. Like they don't have any limbs, and the way they move is real. And again, the way they move like that is so that they can appear invisible to most of their prey. Humans and birds are two of the only creatures that can actually detect that movement, which we'll get into, birds and spirits down the road. So, birds and like angelic spirits, anyway.
The important thing to note is a contrarian or someone who disagrees with this sort of idea, and they have every right to, would point out that the snake, of course, as Deox said, the snake isn't too important because you could replace it with any animal and it would serve the same function. But there is a reason on why in mythologies, whenever we have a depiction of the ancient patriarchal, god of order fighting against a chaotic beast, the reason why we don't fight against like a narwhal or a porpoise or even like something close, sometimes it could be a lizard, but a snake just works. It fits into that category. There's just something about it that we see that inherently scares us.
It goes back like the perception thing. It goes back to the perception thing where it's like we see the snake as like some sort of like alien creature, and that just worked. It's like a primordial feel, basically.
I mean, would fucking Apophis or Apep from Egyptian mythology be as effective if it was like an elephant,
a
sheep,
a fungus,
an elephant?
A sheep? No, fuck. Yeah, an elephant? No, fuck that. It's a snake.
The thing is, there are other like more alien things in the world, like bugs and stuff, but they're not threatening they're not threatening in the same immediate way that a snake is.
Yeah.
A lot of species of snakes in these areas were like kill on bite. Like you get bit by a snake in like Egypt.
I think you're cutting out, Birbddha. Your mic is fading out there or something.
Yeah, it sounds like the serpent is eating you, bird.
But what I said was like a lot of snakes in those areas were like very deadly. So
yeah, and they're really hard to deal with too. And again, their movement is almost random and chaotic too, and that's like that on purpose because it's to throw off their prey. It's hard for them to see where the snake actually is. But in every god hierarchy, there's like nearly every god hierarchy, it's usually topped by a creator god figure
and a figure that is relatively serpentine. An example of this is even in biblical mythology, when we don't think about it too often, God, when he's creating the universe, even before then, is battling the Leviathans, which represents anti-creation, anti-God, a symbol of pure chaos. He needed to destroy the Leviathan and use its body in order to create the universe. And I think that's really strange and really funny. It might just be like a a passed on tradition from other older myths, from Babylonian to Sumerian. But it's interesting that archetype keeps.
Well, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and we'll get into them later because reading them lately has definitely helped me reconcile all these strange ideas, because I've seen all of this stuff as separate most of my life. But Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, Tolkien was, he's a hardcore Roman Catholic, and C.S. Lewis ended up becoming Anglican. But even then, they basically both said, all these pagan religions, all these myths, they're all true. They're just less refined.
Yeah,
they're all based in some truth. They were less refined to the religions they considered the most refined version of how reality works, as far as our consciousness perceives it anyway. So,
and in preparation of my podcast, because I kind of had the idea in my head, but I wanted to better articulate it. And basically, all these symbols, basically what he told me is that all symbolism that we have seen in ancient cultures are basically a reflection of the world as they know it. Mm-hmm. It still affects us to this day.
It's not a literal description of the world. It is a symbolic representation of how our consciousness organizes and perceives the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense.
And the snake, the snake is important in that way because, like I said, the snake is dangerous. Mm-hmm. And it's connected with that fear that, that it's threatening and it's hard to understand. It's so different. And that's what all of the symbolic elements are. They're just exactly that. Just symbolic way to convey, aspects of the world and make sense of it. And I guess it comes into how ancient cultures view the world. If you go back to a lot of old religions and mythologies, if you look at how they thought about the world, going from ancient Egypt to Norse mythology, or even new religions like Buddhism, Hinduism,
even in Christianity and all the various forms of Catholicism, it's still there. This idea of this continual cycle of order and chaos fighting each other.
Yeah, when you look at, for example, this is what I know the best, but if you look at Norse mythology, the world being represented through a tree is not a random thing, and it has enormous symbolic value, and it's a reflection of how they view the world and how they made sense of it, and that's why a lot of this creation myths and the world views in mythology and religion can seem so weird and abstract. Like the world is being carried on top of a bunch of elephants. It's not necessarily literal.
It's not. But it's not how the physical world came to be. It's how your consciousness created the world that you are perceiving. It's a way of representing it through animals and symbols and stuff.
Yeah, it's all an interpretation, really.
Yeah, and one could even see the tree be used over and over again in even after Norse mythology. You can see that in Christianity too. While the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge, doesn't literally hold the world together, one could even stretch it to be a parallel to Yggdrasil, the Norse tree. Hell, the Kabbalah, the whole point of that religion is that the Kabbalah itself is the tree, and that it is sort of the linchpin of existence. And if Kabbalah, if you can draw like a parallel between Kabbalah and Norse mythology, something's going on, because Kabbalah
because they seem so. And again, it's the same thing with Christianity, like Hinduism, all these religions, there's something kind of connecting them all, but we'll get to the tree in just a second. I feel like another thing we should point out is a really modern idea is this conception that chaos is evil.
Yeah, it's not. That's
no,
one thing I've been
both chaos and order are both good and bad depending on the situation and how things are going, so to speak. Both chaos and order can be a good and bad thing, and symbolically in stories, those are like, in terms of chaos, the good aspect is represented by the mother nature, the nurturing mother, the life-giving aspect of the world, and then the negative side of chaos is represented by the devouring mother, the negative or the terrible aspects of nature. And then in terms of order, the negative aspects of order are represented by the tyrannical father. That's usually like a dictator figure or some person that's dominating and forcing everyone to be like them or their ideology or whatever. And then the good side of order is I can't remember the exact name, but I think it's the wise father. A good king, basically.
And as we've discussed before, and you guys in the comments, if you're not part of the Discord, you might not hear this, but the Hyrulean conquest characters basically encompass some of these ideas. Demaco is, a bad representation of order. And
he's the tyrannical father.
Mother. Yeah.
And just to go into, I guess, how this applies to Hyrule Conquest anyway. Yes, this conflict between order and chaos is going on in the Solcaris arc right now. Demoko and the Oka, they're clearly order. They're completely frozen in time and they've stagnated. And it's kind of represented in the fact that his giant clock in his city is completely at a standstill, even though he's the Sage of Time. So there's kind of a funny paradox there. He's supposed to be the Sage of Change, of things moving along, and yet he is so trapped in the stagnating order or whatever. And then Solcaris is the exact opposite. She's basically become part of the Goma, this like ever-changing, constantly morphing thing that has no concrete identity, that's always changing over time. And because of that, she loses her own identity to that. She basically becomes indistinguishable from the Goma as a whole.
Yeah.
And
so
they come into conflict with each other, and there's no synthesis between the two, so they both get destroyed in the process.
Yeah, because she herself, she becomes a slave of her own power. She grows in strength and becomes more resilient by linking herself with the Goma, but then the cost, she's basically IMS's, the Drufilidai that made the Goma.
I pronounce it Iomannis.
Iomannis. She's basically an extension of him now. She's no longer the Sage of the Forest. She's basically Solcaris Herald of Iomannis.
Wait, speaking of like this chaos and order thing with the Goma, didn't Iomannis basically make the Goma to be like the ultimate order thing where there was
Yes, this is what I was getting at with Demoko. They're both trying to achieve the opposite thing because that's what they're missing. Demoko is the Sage of Time. He needs chaos and order, to have that sort of process continue. And Iomannis is chaos, but he wants order. And that's what he's trying to do, but he's missing that component, so all they can do is create order and chaos, and they haven't properly synthesized. And we'll get into the idea of synthesis down the road, because that's important to all of this.
I think we should also get back to more of the symbolic components, because it's very easy to get carried away. And I like some people asked in the chat, what is a principality? What is the serpent? What is
a principality? If you guys would like to know, Nephy can go more into it.
Yeah,
but
you brought up the idea of Solcaris being a herald of Iomannis, so I think that's a good segue to talk about principalities.
Yeah.
Think of it this way, chat. If you guys have read Lovecraft or read Jung, it's basically, it can be equated to an archetype. And what it is like a very ancient concept or idea that is existing and continues to exist through the interaction of mortals. For example, let's say, I brought this idea up before. If you guys watch Freddy vs. Jason, it's a obtuse movie, I know, but like...
It's a crude but decent example of this idea.
Okay, but like Freddy Krueger basically is immortal in the sense that he can come back no matter how many times he dies. But the key thing is, though, if he is forgotten, his power diminishes and he loses the will to carry on. So he needs people to remember him to extend his strength. See, he becomes abstraction. He's an idea, and he can affect the world way more as an idea than he can as a person. However, he needs to maintain a level of infamy. People need to know about him. It's also like American gods. The gods grow in strength when more people worship and dedicate themselves to them. New gods have more strength that dwarf the old gods because their power is past their prime. And the idea is that the Droof, the sages, even Link himself is linked to, no pun intended, a principality, an idea.
Yes,
That they all
I'm
would come
certain this is how canon Zelda treats it too, because this is how all myths and religions treat their supernatural, their deities, and things like angels and demons. They're all this concept of an archetype or principality, this sort of abstract entity that doesn't really have any kind of physical components, but it manifests in the world using people as a sort of like proxy body. This is really hard to break down, but I'm going to talk about the example I was given that made me understand this concept, and the idea of Santa Claus. And there's actually this guy on YouTube that talks about all this stuff. I highly recommend checking out his channel. His name's Jonathan Pageau. I think that's how his last name's pronounced.
Oh, that's how it's pronounced? I thought it was Pagoo.
It might be Pagoo. I don't
Magoo.
think I've heard anyone actually say his last name, but he talks about the idea of principalities and stuff, and that's where this was defined for me.
I just call him Mr. Magoo.
But he gave the example of Santa Claus. So basically, you have all these people around the world who go to malls and they dress up as Santa Claus and they act like Santa Claus, and the little kids come and ask him for presents and stuff, and the little kid isn't entirely or truly talking to the person wearing the Santa Claus outfit, and the Santa Claus outfit isn't entirely speaking of themselves. Like when when a little kid goes to Santa Claus and asks for presents, the guy playing Santa Claus doesn't just say, "Oh, I'm Joe," and he doesn't start talking about his divorce or how his things are going on in life. Like, there is a dialogue between this child and the abstract idea of Santa Claus being embodied in this person.
Yeah.
So
It's
the
a
idea
mask
is
they wear.
Yes, it's a mask they wear. You'll start to see how this connects to Zelda pretty soon. But
yeah, and I think
what was
another
I
way,
saying?
like a good way to say that is it's basically a role you're playing. It's imagine that the world and reality as itself is a screenplay, and you're assigned a role. And you're not when you're an actor, you're not literally the person you're playing a role for, but you are a manifestation of that role, in the sense that like we brought up before, the Joker. We all have an idea of who the Joker is, but every actor or voice actor is just an expression of that idea. They're all playing the role, but they are not the role in itself.
Yeah, basically the idea is the Joker. The idea of the Joker exists in some kind of abstract space. Whether you see that as a supernatural entity or something materialistic phenomenon is irrelevant. The point is, the idea of the Joker exists, and he can manifest in the world through people embodying him in some way. And they don't even necessarily need to look like the Joker. As long as they functionally play that role, they are the Joker in the world. And that's how names can change, and visual images of archetypes can change. As long as they embody that idea, that's what they are. And this ties directly into the idea of demise and Ganon and Ganondorf and all of this stuff in Zelda and canon Zelda, and highly in all of this. And it's pretty awesome when you start to notice all this stuff.
In Don DeLuise, a good example of this is to think of like the way people talk about themselves. Every time you hear an edgy kid talk about like "I'm the devil" or use that as a tagline, you start to realize that they, even if they aren't literally the devil, they are extending the devil's will.
They are functionally the devil. Whether they literally are or not is irrelevant. They are functioning as that role in the world. And this is where the idea of possession comes from. The stream just went silent after that.
I was waiting for someone to talk and I didn't want to interrupt them again. Because that tends to happen. And
the thing about principalities is there isn't just one level or layer of principalities. There's this ever-ascending hierarchy of them. There's principalities inside other principalities and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And, it's a pretty interesting and weird idea, but it completely explains a lot of things in religion and myth and Zelda itself, and how people saw the world before the 20th century.
Well, if we're talking about chaos, we got to talk about, because people in the comment section have been crazy about this, of the ultimate herald of chaos. Because in the top of every hierarchy, chaos is usually there. And in Hyrule Conquest, there's no bigger, badder threat than Tinkle. No, Majora's
Knew you were gonna say that.
is the ultimate symbol of chaos.
You don't know that yet. Maybe when Terminal rolls around, we'll see Tinkle for what he truly is.
Yeah, with him twerking on everybody. No, but Majora is the ultimate symbol of chaos. And if you guys really want to draw parallels, just do research on, entities like Apep from Egyptian mythology.
Or Apophis.
Apophis or Epep, yeah. Nidhogg, I'm gonna butcher it, but is it Jormungandr, the Norseman?
Yes, yeah, Jormungandr.
I think it's pronounced Jormungandr. I don't know.
Jormungandr? I don't know.
There's also
Chaos
himself from Greek.
Yeah, Greek mythology. Well, that's where the word chaos comes from, is that the Greek version of the archetype of chaos.
Yeah,
Top of that hierarchy.
chaos in Greek was like just the entire universe before like time or anything.
The way to interpret order and chaos in a materialistic or secular way is chaos is basically just potential. It can be anything or nothing. It has no definition. And order is something that is completely known and understood.
Yeah,
that's the distinction. And it's not, and neither one is good or evil. They're just two different states of reality.
Oh, sorry, I keep interrupting you. Go on.
No.
Order is basically when you know what's gonna happen. Chaos is chance.
Yeah.
Not necessarily chance. It just could be anything. You don't know yet until it happens. It's basically the difference between potential and kinetic energy to drive it into physics, but
Ted, get
one
that
is
Sonic
known
shit
and
out of
one
here.
isn't known.
Get that Sonic shit out of here, Tedster. You know what you're doing.
But I think the two concepts of order and chaos, especially when we relate it to ancient civilizations, is it makes sense when you understand or look at how they view the world. And the way they look at the world is a reflection of how they find themselves in the world. And we were talking about this earlier, and this is where the other symbolic elements comes in. Basically, the conflict between order and chaos. And agricultural societies have a very shared understanding of how the world works, and chaos it's basically everything that is not ordered. And in a way you can understand it's like, if you look at ancient civilizations and how they understood chaos and order, is that the world is chaotic. And we always come back to this, that in the beginning, there was chaotic.
Yeah, I think an Egyptian Apophis was the first thing to exist.
Yeah.
No, chaos itself. In fact, it was just primordial chaos, and then the things came out of that.
Apophis is just the most
embodiment of that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. He's the most embodied form of chaos in the world in the Egyptian mythology. You can't embody it any more clearly than Apophis to an Egyptian.
Yeah. And, then the giant snake going back.
I think you're cut out there for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I hope
we're
you're
going
okay
back
there.
to the snake thing.
Yeah,
sorry, exactly.
Sorry, my mic is crap.
No, it's fine, but that's what I was getting to, because you can understand chaos. This primordial chaos that always is mentioned, you can understand it in a more material way as a wilderness. It's unpredictable, it's not ordered, it's nature. And then that's where it comes in, and this relates to what I know the best, which is Norse mythology. This reflects how they view the world, because they were farmers. They were a product of the agricultural revolution, like a lot of civilizations are. Yeah. And they took this chaotic wilderness and ordered it in such a way that they could, comfortably exist in it. And that's what the farm is, the garden.
Yeah.
They make a space within chaos that they can understand and that they can relate to. And that's what the farm is, and that's what the tree symbolizes. The tree is the familiar, the orderly, the things that you can relate to and understand. And then what is around the farm, there's the order, the fence of and beyond that is everything that is, chaos, essentially. It's the unfamiliar. And this idea can relate to your everyday.
Related to what?
Yeah, this idea relates to modern society in a way, because I'd imagine that most people, you and Chad and everyone here, we are, in most cases, the most comfortable in our home, and that home is sort of like our ideal existence and our garden in a sense, because we understand our home. We know we feel safe there. Again, there's probably exceptions to this, but this kind of relates to how we want the world to be, and this is what what Midgard is in Norse mythology. That's the world.
It's
Also
the Garden of Eden in Christianity.
Yeah,
this familiar place with no chaotic elements, until a serpent wanders in.
Yeah,
and the key thing is a serpent always wanders in the garden. There's no way to kill that serpent. You basically need to be on guard for it at all times because it'll come in sooner or later. And the sad thing is, and all the mythologies, including Christianity, someone invites it in. So there's this idea that no matter how stable the order becomes, chaos will be invited in by the actual people trying to build up the order through some fault of their own or something.
Yeah. Yeah, just like how in Hyrule Conquest, the sages let Majora in.
Exactly. Majora didn't come in; they invited him in.
Because they were inviting chaos in earlier.
And it's like this relates to how, like what I was saying, like how ancient societies view the world, because. Again, mythology is usually an expression of a society. The mythology reflects how humans organize themselves and like how they view the world, and that's where this tree comes in. Because the tree, it doesn't really matter that it's a tree, but what matters is what it symbolizes. And the tree symbolizes again the order. The garden is an extension of this idea, and the fence is everything within the fence is why you could call this abstract garden. It's in a garden you cut the grass, you tend to the flowers, it's orderly, and beyond the fence is everything you don't have control over, and you don't really know what's out there. It's
you can see this in the canon Zelda games too, especially in like Ocarina of Time with the Kokiri Forest. That's what the Deku Tree means by, if you leave the forest, you'll die. It's the same concept in like Genesis when God tells Adam and Eve, you're gonna die if you leave the garden or whatever. It's not an instantaneous like death. It's you will be exposing yourself to the chaos. You're leaving the known order. You are going to die at some point, no matter what you do, because you are venturing into chaos. It's that exact idea, and that's in Norse mythology too. It's in all of these mythologies. Everywhere.
That's in Chinese mythology too. That's in Taoism.
Yeah.
I wanted to just say too that someone asked if Malice was a principality.
Yeah.
Yes, Malice is a principality. All the Druth are a sort of principality. They encompass an idea that is inherently chaotic, and that's why their interaction with the world of Hyrule is extremely violent and chaotic by an extension.
Should we start connecting all this stuff to the canon Zelda games now?
Yeah.
Or was there anything else we need to talk about first?
What? I was gonna say something about like with Kokiri Forest. There's something like that in most Zelda games. Like in Twilight Princess, there's Ordona.
Windwanker, the farm Ordana. And even in Wind Waker, the forest and the Koroks, what are they doing in the world? They're going out and they're planting trees. They're basically creating order out of the chaos of the Great Sea. They're symbolic. They appear as trees because they're symbolically playing the part of those that generate order.
Yeah, what I was saying was there was always like that place where you're safe and it's always order, but once you go out, then there's like all sorts of madness. And another thing too, there's always like later in the game, stuff invades that place.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, the notion of the safe haven, this abstract garden, is a very common trope in human narrative. And if you guys, think back to whatever fiction you've read, or even myth, usually it begins that the hero is forced to leave the garden. He is forced to seek the chaos beyond the border of his comfort zone, essentially, and or something enters the garden that forces the denizens of it to act. This is a very common trope, and therefore you can see it. You can see it pretty much everywhere. There are obviously a lot of writers tend to try to break away from this trope because it's so common.
But there's no real escape
it's a cliche
from
for
it.
a reason.
It sort of feels off when they try to break away from this stuff. Which I feel is why a lot of modern movies and stuff, like why a lot of people dislike it, because I mean, a modern movie still have this stuff in them, but it's a little more jumbled and disjointed. Because I know for certain M. Night Shyamalan is well aware of all this stuff, but I've heard him in interviews. He purposely wants to break all of the stuff, but you can't. It's just ingrained in our psychology, and there's no real escape from it. You can change the images and the way it's manifested, but the archetype cannot be broken. There's no way to escape it. And if you try to, your story comes out a little jumbled, and it feels like something's sort of missing.
Well, I think the bigger problem with M. Night Shyamalan is he's aware of it, doesn't know how to tell the story in the right way. Rather than subverting it, he's too. I think he's way too like up his own ass in the worst case scenarios where
he's too focused on the chaos. He's too focused on the chaos. He doesn't have enough order.
I was just gonna say he needs a better script.
Well, like his movie Lady in the Water is like a perfect example. He wants to basically destroy the idea of an archetype and create new ones, which is very Nietzschean of him, but you can't. Yeah. There's no way to do that. There's no way to escape the way our brain works. Not that we have at the moment, anyway.
He needs to clean his room.
They exist for a reason, and when he tears them down, he basically removes like all familiar.
Yeah.
Which is why his movies feel really alien, especially like Lady in the Water. Like he outright says it in the movie. The characters in Lady of the Water, they're playing highly specific parts.
Yeah. I mean, Split was pretty good, but I think that encompassed a much more straightforward idea.
Well, yeah, I think he realized I can't break these archetypes. I'm gonna, try and. He's accepting the fact of he's accepting that he has to play a role now, and he's starting to embrace it, and he's bringing his own bit of him to the character, so to speak.
Yeah, which is comes off as much more natural.
Yeah,
but I wanted to talk about how because there's been lore questions, but one of the parallels we were talking about ideas being reused and reused again is that Demise in Hyrule Conquest shares a lot of parallels to a biblical demon called Azazel, Azazel,
or
and
Prometheus in Greek mythology. Yeah, I kind of unconsciously because for those unfamiliar with the story of Azazel, you probably know the Greek interpretation, which is the story of Prometheus. Basically, Azazel is this angel that came down to Earth, and he became a fallen angel, and he taught humanity how to fight and create weaponry and basically amass power over the Earth in a very warlike kind of fashion. And that exact pattern is in Hyrule Conquest, kind of unintentionally. And another thing about the story of Azazel is him and the other angels that worked with him, they created the Nephilim, which, coincidence, it's my it's in my username, but I've been struggling for years with this idea of what a Nephilim is. It's a really strange idea. Basically, if you take it literally, they are the children of an angel and a demon. But if you look at it from the perspective of angels being this kind of principality, this abstract idea that doesn't have any physical form, that crossing with a human or something physical of the earth, it's basically someone who is fully No, I'm having a really hard time articulating this, but it's like
basically it's the bastardization of a good idea.
Yeah, we haven't talked about synthesis yet. It's basically a synthesis between heaven and earth, except that thing in heaven, and we haven't defined heaven and earth yet either. So we're going way out of order now.
Well, what I was going to say was that if any of you guys have played Bloodborne, that whole thing is about a failed synthesis. The Lovecraftian elder gods called Great Ones. They come in contact with humanity, and humanity literally starts trying to splice their genes with these gods. But humanity hasn't evolved or grown the wisdom to, incorporate themselves with these heavenly beings. So they mutate and become these bastard spawn.
Which is
exactly what happens to them. Yeah, which is exactly what happens to the Moblins. They become this horrible, brutish, disgusting, bastard spawn of life. And they're strong, they're powerful, they're resilient, but they're not ideal. They have no
aspects of heaven. So should we actually define what
They're not
ancient
smart.
cultures mean by earth and heaven, and should we define what a synthesis is? Because synthesis is really important
Yeah.
to all of this too.
Sure.
So,
we
That's
should.
natural
all
progression.
right, I'll go ahead and define earth and heaven. So like in our modern society, we kind of have this idea of like heaven is like this physical place where, you know, things are perfect and nothing goes wrong, but that is not actually what heaven means in myths and religions and stuff. Heaven and earth is basically the material and the abstract. Earth is everything physical or material that has some sort of physical embodiment, and heaven is anything abstract or idea related. And this is really, it's really illustrated best in like Taoism and Confucianism. There's this idea that the earth or the physical realm serves as like sustenance that feeds heaven or the abstract, and then the heavenly or abstract basically beams down ideas to the earth, and it's like this kind of this almost like a cycle of it's like this cycle of they're feeding off of each other.
Yeah, it's a prototype of this idea is when Uranus, god of the sky, god of the heaven, mates with Earth, and they have children. But the children are big, brutish, ugly monsters: the giants, the Cyclops, and the Titans. And that you can see the Nephilim and the interaction between fallen angels and humanity to being sort of a progression of that concept. The idea of heaven and earth meeting, creating stuff. That's a sort of synthesis.
Yeah, so I'll go into synthesis now. The idea of synthesis is basically a joining of heaven and earth, and the old word for that, which is a Christian word. Oh, it's not. It's from Greek,
Gnosis.
but yes, gnosis, and gnosis basically means knowledge, and it's to know things, and it's usually wrapped in sexual language. It's described as almost like this physical union of two things that know each other.
Stick that skycock up my earth pussy.
And
my
God. And basically there is a way to properly synthesize and improperly synthesize, and when you get a proper synthesis of heaven and earth, you get something like in Christianity, like a Jesus figure, or like this proper complete synthesis of heaven and earth, where they're a master of both chaos and order, and they're basically kind of like this better, flawless kind of being. And then an improper synthesis is like a Nephilim. It's because the thing in heaven that you're synthesizing with, that you're coming to gnosis with, there's something ill about it or wrong with it. So the Nephilim are basically like spiritually inbred things.
Well, and all the groups basically make Nephilim. The Vadi himself creates, he kind of makes the Dark Nuts into what they are today. These arrogant, pompous, powerful, but, these kind of delusional beings who are sort of self-idolizing and constantly up their own asses. Even though they're powerful, they are self-destructive. The Moblins are sort of like that, and one could even interpret that all of the group are making sort of a a failed representation of life. Like they're above mankind, but they're not quite godly or divine.
No, because their minds are set to the earth.
Yeah.
And that's the whole concept of a fallen angel, and why in a lot of old depictions of fallen angels, it was even in that one weird Noah movie recently where the fallen angels look like rock monsters instead of a typical. Yeah, because their minds are set to earth and not heaven. And that is in every myth everywhere.
Yeah.
This idea of heavenly things trying to find gnosis with earthly things, and then there's just this habit of it failing and spawning something like a Nephilim. That's the Jotuns in Norse mythology.
It is interesting too that themselves also are like Nephilim in a way.
Anyways,
I interrupted Burb again. Yeah.
I want to point out that it's okay. By the way, I want to point out that in like some Old Testament thing, Satan is described as like the Lord of the Earth.
Yes, the Prince of the Earth, because he's basically, in Christianity, he is the fullest embodiment of chaos with some kind of personality. And an interesting thing about
he's not the most powerful. That's a misunderstanding.
He's the one with the most I guess you could say He's the most the one you can actually interact with and have a conversation, which is what I'm going to get to right now. This idea in what we talked about earlier, the Chaos Conf, this thing where there's order and chaos perpetually battling each other. In the West,
yeah.
it's usually portrayed as like a physical battle. You know, you have the sky god with some kind of bolt or a hammer or something, and they're wailing on like the snake-like creature. And then in Eastern mythology, it's usually portrayed as kind of like a truce. Like they kind of work around each other or with each other, but they're not actually like combined or anyway. But
sorry for
an
the
interesting
interruption,
thing.
but I'm gonna go for a bit.
Okay.
All right, see you, man.
I'll see you later. See you
I'll be
later.
back.
Yeah.
An interesting thing
yeah.
about Christianity, which is different from all the other ones, though, is it's portrayed as a dialogue.
Yeah.
You see that both in Genesis and in the New Testament. In Genesis, in the beginning, like the conflict between order and chaos, between God and the void, is actually like a dialogue with it. He's speaking to it, and things are happening. Whereas in the New Testament, you see this with Jesus and Satan. They have a dialogue with each other. Like they don't punch each other in the face like in other myths. So that's a pretty weird idea that you can have a dialogue between order and chaos. And I think that's why the quote-unquote victory condition in something like Christianity is synthesis, because all the religions have different ways of dealing with the cycle of order and chaos.
And in Hinduism, one of the many creation myths revolves around Vishnu, who is part of the ancient trinity of the Trinity, which are basically creation, maintenance, and destruction. And Vishnu, the maintainer, sits atop Anatashisha, which is a chaos serpent itself that constantly spawns new ideas, that sits atop infinity and is constantly growing and it can't be held by any structure. Like the laws of life and death don't apply to it because it's beyond laws. It's chaotic. It's beyond life and death. But rather than fighting against Vishnu sleeps on top of it, and they basically sit atop watching creation go, be born, get destroyed, be born, get destroyed again. So it's a union, not a discussion, not a battle. So I think that's interesting. It's a much more passive creation.
I would say it's more like a truce than a union, because if it was a union, they'd probably be portrayed as physically combined.
Yeah.
I think, but even in Western mythology and a lot of religion, the union between chaos and order and how they relate to each other it's seen often as a necessary part of how the world works. And a good example is how order leads to stagnation, and that stagnation nothing ever changes. There's no improvement. Everything is sort of in this status, like nothing ever. And the ideal is for things to change, and you build, you destroy it, you build, and you destroy it, and there's constant improvement. That's the ideal.
Now we're getting into the cyclical nature of time, and then we'll finally be able to connect all of this to Zelda.
Oh, by the way, Neph, Tedster wants to join. Oh wait, no, she doesn't have a mic. Never mind.
Oh,
no,
sorry,
cool
Teddy. We'll have Teddy on next time.
Yeah. We're talking about, I don't know, pickles or something. Anyways.
No, but
yeah,
so
go on,
what
Deox.
what I was going into is that, for example, an apocalyptic event such as Ragnarok in Norse mythology, Christianity introduced that this was like a negative thing, but it really is not. And even then, this is more of a modern.
It's actually not negative in Christianity either. It's a problem with the modern society. But I'll get to that. That's kind of the crux of this whole thing, is how modern society has kind of forgotten all of this stuff. But go on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, but the breaking of the order is seen as a necessary. I guess if a matter is big, a necessary evil. It needs to happen, and if you leave order to its own devices, again, nothing ever changes. Therefore, chaos is still needed. Chaos needs to exist. They need to exist in relation to each other. And it's a modern interpretation, because chaos is it's a very uncomfortable thing,
Well, it's dangerous. That's probably why it's become to be seen as evil. But it's not inherently evil. It's just dangerous because you don't know all the variables. It has an unknown nature to it. But order can be just as bad.
Chaos as evil.
Order
It's
it
very
can be
easy
just
to-
as bad if
because-
it's allowed to fully take over, so to speak.
Yeah, and the same goes for order. You know, no one wants complete stagnation. But
Because then it becomes a tyranny.
Change is usually very uncomfortable because we like the familiar, and this relates back to the garden. We like the familiar, we like the things we understand. But at the same time, you know, you could guess this is like I guess you could say that this is like the great, you know, paradox
Yeah.
of humanity is that we strive for order and understanding, but at the same time we need variables in our life to change.
Yeah.
Because because then we can never improve.
We basically need
Yeah.
to leave the garden every once in a while, or we'll be stuck in a
Yeah.
perpetual childlike state, which is, you know, it's illustrated in, you know, right there in Genesis. You know, Adam and Eve are like these perpetual childlike beings that are completely innocent, and then they have a little encounter with chaos, and it basically traumatizes them. And then, you know, they're forced out of the garden or whatever, and you see this in other mythologies too, and just in the hero story, like, you know, their farm or their homeland is attacked, or something comes in and mucks things up, and they're forced to venture out into chaos and learn new things and be, you know, grow up, so to speak.
Yeah, but in the process is what happens in existence is like it takes. I feel like the process of synthesis usually takes a bunch of attempts before it actually properly starts working.
Yeah, it happens
And
on
we
all
have
different scales. Like, it happens on small scales. It probably is happening on cosmic scales too, on all levels of the hierarchy.
Yeah. Yeah, and
it happens
in
with... Yeah, go on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
In Hyrule Conquest, we see that being attempted, but not quite done well. One could say that Link might be potentially a successful synthesis, but we'll just wait and see what happens. So tune in next week. 5 years.
Well, if people are listening and then looking at the stained glass thing I put there, they might be able to... Everything we're talking about is in the image I put up there.
Well, here's the thing, guys, and this is spoilers. You know, we're basically spoiling the plot for you. So if you get any of this, you're probably going to figure out what happens. But enough of that. But yeah, I find it interesting that a lot of mythologies basically talk about these two, you know, primordial forces, and talk about how they overlap, and the goal is trying to create a sort of a successful overlapping, in a way, where Jesus is both a representation, manifestation of the infinite, you know, power of God in heaven, but is also the best a man can be.
Exactly.
Human can be.
He's a perfect synthesis, like a gnosis between earth and heaven, and that's what a successful hero is in any story. They go into chaos, and I like to use the example of Batman and the Joker, and this is specifically in the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. The Batman and the Joker are basically two characters that are exposed to chaos. One of them successfully integrates it into himself, and the other one doesn't. You even have the death and resurrection and the Dark Knight Rises at the end too. But we'll get into that when I get to like Birbddha and Zant and start connecting this to Zelda, because there's like so much we still have to unpack.
Yeah, I think what we're basically trying to convey is that, you know, these concepts in, you know, human narrative are very old and very reoccurring elements, and like they happen all over, but they also add something to the narrative, because it doesn't, like, the narrative is not only focused on characters and their problems, but you elevate the entire conflict and the entire being in the narrative to a bigger scale, and that's what a lot of mythology does. You know, it's not really about like you said, Neph, it's not really about the talking donkey. That's not really the story.
Yes, it's about the fact that something you don't normally listen to is speaking to you.
Yeah.
The donkey is just a symbol. It could be, you know, just some person that, you know, you've never listened to that's talking. The point is something that doesn't normally speak, or that you don't normally listen to, is giving you information, and you should probably take heed of it. It's a symbolic representation of this sort of event that happens. It's displayed with visual images, because that's a more powerful way of communicating that to people than just saying, oh, you should listen to people that don't normally talk to you. It has more of a sort of primal impact on a person. I use the example of like teaching someone like that you know, fire can burn you. You know, if you're really materialist and you're factual, you'll just be like, if you touch that fire, it'll burn you and your hand will hurt.
Yeah,
That's like, there's no passion or anything behind that. But if you tell a child like a story of like how this person encountered the fire or whatever, and you know, it changed them in a negative way or whatever, it'll have more of a psychological impact on the person, and they will get the point that fire burns better than if you just told it in a way that's really matter of fact.
Yeah.
And that is what myths are. Myths are not... And same thing with all the religious stories and all the myths and the Legend of Zelda. It is not a series of recorded historical events that actually happened in a linear sequence. It is a cycle of patterns of being told over and over again and manifesting in slightly different ways. And now I think we can finally start connecting all of this stuff to the Legend of Zelda.
Well, I also think that this is my opinion too, but I also think one of the biggest issues, what a lot of conflict leads from, is the fear of chaos and the denial of letting it in your life. Because, I mean, the idea is, yes, it will come in your life and, you know, it will fuck you up, but not if you're prepared for it and not if you acknowledge the good parts of it. If you let it consume you, that's the bad part.
And this goes right into Birbddha and Zant, like full force, but continue.
Well, I was saying like this, in most mythologies, in fact, I'm just going to be ballsy and say all mythologies. Everything comes from
what I miss.
We talked about synthesis.
Everything comes from a primordial chaos, a primordial nothingness, in which it's a fertile nothingness in which everything comes from. And in acknowledging this allows you, one, to like understand life in a better way. But there's a denial of that, a fear of acknowledging that. And that fear is what leads to humanity's downfall, I think. You know, ostracizing, trying to reject where you're from. It's sort of like, in Hinduism, the biggest sin isn't like, you know, the biggest sin is pride and letting your ego get in the way of you. It's letting yourself think that you don't belong in the cycle.
Yeah.
You know, that you're too
postmodernists.
Yeah, that you can find a way out of the cycle. And that is basically arrogance on a level of like, in which the gods do not respect that, because there's basically a place for everyone here, and to act like you don't belong here is sort of pompous.
And I think that is the character arc of Princess Zelda in Breath of the Wild right there.
Yeah,
and why I have come around on the character, so we'll get into you know, my reinterpretation of Breath of the Wild in a bit, I guess. But
I'll be back, by the way, guys. You can continue.
All right. Yeah, we were gonna talk about Birbddha and Zant, but I can't remember what the context was.
Well, like, the chaos.
Yeah, the Birbddha and Zant. It's basically like in the Old Testament. It's the Cain and Abel story, and it's this idea that people are put into a situation where they have to face chaos. It's the same thing as Batman and the Joker, or, you know, Loki and Thor. One person accepts the burden of chaos and makes the proper sacrifice in order to survive and thrive in the situation, and the other one does not want to accept this burden of chaos, and they become progressively more angry and bitter and nihilistic. And you see this in all kinds of myths and stories. And in Twilight Princess, that's Birbddha and Zant. And Birbddha and Zant are both from the realm of Twilight, which is literally the place on the border of order and chaos. Or in Twilight Princess is represented as light and dark. It's the Twilight. It's that place right in the middle where people are... They have one foot in chaos and one in order. And Birbddha basically... you know, she uses the fused shadow or whatever, and she ends up killing Zant. But she recognizes, oh my goodness, like... there's a monster in me, and she successfully integrates that into her, and that idea is the shadow or whatever. I feel like I'm just psychobabbling now, but I'm gonna continue. So Birbddha's like an Abel.
Something in Twilight.
And hold on, let me finish my thought. She's kind of like Abel, and in the game this literally happens. She makes the sacrifice. You know, she takes out the spear and she unleashes her chaos, and she tries to stop Ganondorf. And you, from the player's perspective, you see her die. You see Ganondorf lift up the helmet and crush the helmet, and you, without foreknowledge, think she's dead. And then after the battle, after you defeat Ganondorf or whatever, you see, oh no, Minna's still alive. But she has gone through some kind of change, like physically too. And that's the same idea as, like, you know, Jesus dying on the cross and coming back. When he comes back, he's like, people don't recognize him at first. They're like, there's something weird and different about you. It's the same thing. It's this willingness to accept the burden of chaos, integrate it into your personhood, and become a better person because of it. And then a person who fails at that is someone like Zant. Like, he was exposed to chaos, but he became bitter about it, and he became progressively... That's why people always complain about, you know, why is he so, you know, cool and organized or whatever in the beginning, and then he just goes batshit insane at the end. It's because he's progressively given himself more and more into chaos, and a way to properly represent chaos is insanity, like going crazy. And I would argue Girahim's actually an even better version of that. So yeah, I just said Girahim's actually interesting.
Well, because the idea is one thing, Nephy and I were discussing was that why is it that an ancient, old, and powerful demon lord is so phenomenally stupid and myopic? And one of the main reasons for that is that he's short-sighted. He's only interested in things that benefit him immediately, and he doesn't take the time to learn anything else on his own. That's why he's incompetent as all hell. That's why he's so reliant on a master. Without it, he's just
because he's purely chaotic, and he has no direction. Like the Joker. The Joker even says in the movie, like, I don't have a plan, I'm just doing things.
Back to the Zant point, there's something I want to say that ties back into, like, something we were saying earlier about, like, the memories. Like, if you're remembered, you live. Like, the infamous scene where Zant snaps his neck again and dies.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That goes into the... we still haven't talked about how the things are principalities in the Legend of Zelda. I forgot about that.
Yeah, but the thing about that scene is, we've talked about this, is... the reason Ganon dies is because Zant's the last person who really, like, believes in him, really, like, follows him. Zant snapping his neck is him killing himself, and when that happens, there's no one left.
There's no one left to embody the idea of Ganondorf, and it's visually portrayed as him physically dying, like, as a visual shorthand for the audience.
And fun fact with that scene...
Prior to this, nothing could kill Ganon.
Yeah,
like,
and fun fact about that scene...
because people still remembered him.
Yeah, and a fun fact about that scene, because Aonuma has come, you know, said, like, because people keep asking him, like, what the hell does this scene mean? And he doesn't really know. Because, because the guy that was animating it, they kind of just let him do whatever, you know, the guy that was actually, you know, animating that cutscene, they kind of just let him do whatever he pleased, so Aonuma doesn't even know what that means. But the idea is
someone on the team does, though.
Yeah, someone on the team is probably, you know, very aware of it. And, you know, they were like, yeah, I'm just going to put this in.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Give a fuck. No.
So, we should probably talk about how Zelda is... the reinterpretation of Zelda, and how all of these things are principalities and not actual characters and stuff like that.
Since I'm the villain god, wanking myself right here. I was just going to say that all the villains kind of encompass that idea of letting chaos take the wheel. Instead of Jesus taking the wheel, it's chaos taking the wheel, lol.
Hi, Majora, how you doing?
But, like, it's not even just Majora. They're all kind of slaves to it in a way. I was going to bring
because they think they are in control, but they are not. Like you said, chaos has taken the wheel, but they, in their mind, they think it hasn't, because they're so prideful and selfish, and their mind is completely stuck on Earth and not heaven.
Their will. For example, one of my favorite example, of course, is my favorite Zelda villain, Body, who was inspired by the evil of the hearts of men. He was inspired by the cruelty of people, and he thinks he knows how to, you know, get things done. He thinks he knows how to get things done now. He's like, oh, I figured it out. I just need to be an asshole, and I'll get everything I ever wanted. So he's cruel, he's merciless, he's unemotional, he just laughs at things. And the funny thing is, though, when he finally gets to Light Force, he doesn't really have any control of himself anymore. And then even after Minish Cap and Four Swords, he forgets who he is. He has no memory of who he was as a Minish, and he's basically a massiss darkness in eyes. He's ignorant.
That's why I think Malice is probably like the Hyrule's version of the most embodied form of chaos in Breath of the Wild.
I think there's no doubt.
Because Malice doesn't even seem to have any sentience. It's just purely it's purely of the earth and random. It's completely and utterly chaotic. It
Sentient
has no
goop.
sentience. And
even,
that's
like,
visually
it's-
represented by what happens to the idea of Ganon in Breath of the Wild. He's progressively becoming more and more, and it's in other Zelda games too. This idea of him turning into a pig. The idea of him, the principality of him, is progressively becoming more and more grounded into the earth.
Well, yeah, and in
Same
fact,
thing with
well,
Hylia becoming Zelda, but we'll get to that in a second.
Well, what I was going to say was that, like, Gandalf, it's no coincidence that Gandalf is losing more of his characteristics. He's just becoming another herald of chaos, a representation, abstraction.
Yeah,
he
like
doesn't have
how
a
in-
personality anymore. And while it's not the most interesting character, it makes sense with his, like,
It's-
arc.
we
He's
see
not a
this
master of
in
power. He's a slave of it.
Yeah, we see this in Link Between Worlds, where Yuga summons him, and then he takes control. Like, Ganon at this point, like, isn't Ganon. He's just, like, the symbol of chaos, really. And Yuga, like, takes control.
Breath of the Wild, I think, actually illustrates this the best way, is that when, after you defeat Calamity Ganon, the physical manifestation of, because we know in Breath of the Wild, Ganon is trying to recover his physical form.
But it's taking forever.
Yeah, it's taking forever. So basically what happens is that, he senses that Link woke up in the Shrine of Resurrection, and he was like, oh shit, I better get to work. But, that's, you basically interrupted. And when you defeat that abomination, because he was, hastily trying to recover his physical form, the game explicitly that, he has been consumed by malice.
Yeah.
At this point, the Ganon that we know as a character, it's not really a character anymore.
No.
Well, and that, I really want to get to this right now. I really want to get to this idea of these aren't actual characters; they are embodiments of principalities. The Zelda series is not a series of historical events in a linear progression. They are part of. It's just like any myth or religion. It's this cycle that keeps happening over and over again. And the idea of Link and Zelda there isn't actually a Link and Zelda and Ganon. They are the ideas of Link and Zelda and Ganon, and they are embodied by specific people at that place at time. And Windwanker is extremely insistent on this. The kid in Windwanker, they outright say, this guy isn't Link. He's not related to Link in blood. There's no spirit of Link. He's just some guy. But the moment he puts on that outfit and he starts acting like Link, he is functionally Link in the world. He is embodying the principality of Link. And every Zelda game is like that. There's some of them are more obvious about it than others. So there is no Link, there is no Zelda, there is no Ganon. These are just people at that given time that embody that idea the most, and they are visually represented to the audience in these images that we know. So when we see them, like, oh, that's Link. That's the idea of Link. I know it. And every myth and religion is just like that. Every single one.
Yeah.
And that's why in myths and religion, usually that's why in all religions and myths, usually the name of the characters aren't a name, they're a purpose or a function. Yeah. Like, I think of Israel in the Old Testament. His name literally means, that who wrestles with God. He's not a person, he's a principality. He's an idea that anyone can embody in the world.
Yeah.
But
wow, I just spoke a mouthful.
That's why the series is...
And that's where I was...
The Legend of Zelda.
Yes, and this is where I was horribly misinterpreting the character of Princess Zelda in Breath of the Wild. I didn't like her because I was seeing this character and I'm like, this is not Princess Zelda. This is not how Zelda would act. And then it hit me the other day. I'm like, that's the point. That's why she's failing. That's why everything's going to hell, because she's not properly embodying the idea or the archetype or the principality of Princess Zelda. She is rebelling against that. Her mind is set to the earth. She's interested in earthly things. She wants to find the guardians and the divine beasts. She's digging, and it's physically represented in her behavior too. She's an archaeologist. She digs in the earth, and she has, and this will lead into the failure to pass on tradition and stuff, because that's the other part of the problem. But she was not properly embodying the idea of Zelda, and that is what allowed Calamity Ganon, or the idea of Ganon, to manifest into the world and destroy everything, because she wasn't playing her part properly. The point of her character is that she's not Zelda, and she's not embodying it properly. And then at one moment in the game, for a brief moment, she does properly embody that idea, and that's when she gets, you know, her highly crazy powers or whatever. Ooh, that's a mouthful. I just laid off.
But like that's exactly what happens, because she is you know, she is resistant of, you know, the role she's been assigned to throughout the entire game, like every memory. And then when shit finally, you know, hits the fan, you know, that specific memory where, you know, she and Link is running away, she realizes that, you know, she fucked up, and in a sense that's the turning point, I think. You know, after that's the turning point when she's starting to realize that she needs to play the role that she's been assigned to fix. You know, fix everything, and it comes down to, because you know, the entire game, you know, they I guess we could go into, you know, the entire thing with Roam is that you know, she's been assigned this role, and yeah, her father, you know, King Roam, he's like, you know, you need to unlock your powers to embody the goddess, you know, that is necessary for them to stop the calamity. However, she doesn't want to do this because, you know, her mind is set to the earth. She has other interests, other pursuits. But Rowan never really tells her how to take this role,
because
either.
he doesn't understand.
He's equally guilty, and by extension, the entire culture of Hyrule is guilty, because they lost the knowledge of how to pass
on, which is why. Go on, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
Oh, I was
just gonna say that. I was gonna say that, you know, he kind of just tells her, yeah, you know, just figure it out. And now there's no direction. She is not, you know, she has absolutely no idea.
That is represented in the gameplay of the game itself. In the game, you have no direction. It's all just directionless and disjointed and out of order, just like Princess Zelda, because there was this failure to properly pass on the tradition of the previous generation. In that particular cycle, nothing improved because everyone forgot what they needed to do to properly combat chaos. And I think, and I have seen this exact pattern in something like The Last Jedi. There seems to be a lot of games and movies right now that this pattern of tradition being failed to be passed on seems to be springing up. And I think it's because that's kind of what's happening in our culture right now. Like the boomers have utterly failed to, you know, pass on the meaning of the traditions and stuff. Like, they knew all the rules, but they didn't understand what the rules meant. Like, there's so many people I know who, like, have no idea, like, what the fuck is the point of the holiday? They know the rules of the holiday, but they don't know what they mean, and because of that, they're pushed away from it. And then I know people who are just like, can we just, like, get rid of Christmas because, you know, buying gifts and stuff is a burden. And it's like, you don't know the purpose. Like, it's exactly what's happening in Breath of the Wild, and it happens in The Last Jedi, too. And I absolutely hated The Last Jedi movie, and then I saw this pattern, I'm like, oh god, it's our culture manifesting in the thing right now. Like, Rey goes to the islands trying to find, you know, Luke Skywalker, the person of the previous generation, and he utterly fails to teach her anything. He won't pass on the knowledge, and he even wants to destroy that knowledge too. And then she's just like, well, fuck you, I'm gonna find my way, just like Princess Zelda in Breath of the Wild. Because the previous generation utterly failed to pass on the tradition.
One of the big reasons why Zelda fails in the first place is she doesn't have a proper mentor to guide her.
Exactly.
So it's easy to see why she doesn't have the courage or the will to sort of stand on her own, which is why she pursues the Guardians, because she thinks those things are strong enough to save Hyrule, not herself. Her mother is gone, and her father is too.
Everyone does.
Yeah, because they're a highly materialistic culture, and they don't understand any of their traditions anymore.
Like, the failing of passing on knowledge to the next generation, the game stresses, like, if you guys remember in Breath of the Wild, like, they've forgotten so much. This is because, you know, Breath of the Wild takes whatever time it takes place, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that this is absurdly far in the future. And the point of that is that they've forgotten they've forgotten so much, to the point where they don't even know what a Triforce is. They have
they've lost the ideal.
They have a symbol, but they don't know what it means, and they don't even know what it does. Like, they refer to the Triforce as the sealing power. Like, they've completely forgotten how
they have
works.
no idea what it means anymore. And this is why, like, something like the goddesses in Hylia can fade away and come back, as long it's the same concept of the more people understand this idea of the principality, the more it can embody itself in the world, and that that can fade and grow, like, in a fluid sort of way. That's why Hylia can disappear for so many games, and, like, no one has any idea what the hell that is, and then suddenly come back, because someone in the world embodies her, and it brings that idea back into the world.
Yeah.
And someone is like, oh, that idea, I recognize it. It's a really kind of weird, abstract idea, but it's, like, built into our brains.
I mean, if you think about it, it's a very ingenious way for Nintendo to explain, like, why she's not present in, the era of Ocarina of Time, because at the time, at that period of time, she was forgotten. And she has no influence in the world if no one acknowledges her existence. And like you said, Neph, a good explanation for why she's so present in Breath of the Wild is because someone remembered her. She was brought back. She is influential again.
And it's the same thing in freaking was it Wind Waker? There's one Zelda game where basically the idea of Link has completely disappeared, which led to, like, a disaster in a prologue. I think it was Wind Waker.
Yeah,
I'm having trouble remembering, but
he didn't come in.
Yeah, but I think, as Deox pointed out, Breath of the Wild,
just shows to float.
As Deox pointed out, I think it was yesterday, you basically said in Breath of the Wild it's the exact opposite with Link. He is completely fully embodied in that game, unlike Zelda, which is why he doesn't die and he's able to just come back right away, because so many people embody him in the world. That's why he just comes back and he doesn't die, even though, like, you see him die, because the idea of him is so strong in that world at the time.
Breath of the Wild Link is probably the most perfect embodiment of the hero Link we've ever seen.
That's why you can't name yourself in that game. That's why it's always Link.
Yeah, that's why you can't name him, because that, I guess, in the minds of the creators, that's probably the most raw archetypal form of Link. Then, I mean, I would disagree, but I don't know. Maybe I will agree, actually. Which is probably why he has absolutely no personality in that game.
What I was going to say, I think the DLC, in the DLC, it perfectly illustrates it even further. When you read Mipha's diary, she met Link when he was basically a toddler. And even at that time, he was so perfectly embodying this idea of the hero that he could defeat adults in swordplay as a toddler.
And it's like you said, that's why Zelda hates him, because he is a reminder that she is utterly failing to play her part as Princess Zelda. She's not Princess Zelda at that point.
Something else.
Yeah. And the thing is, she doesn't know how to be Princess Zelda because no one taught her. The tradition failed to be passed on from the previous generation. Like, there's that one part, that really funny part where, you talk about where they just throw her in the cold water. They have no idea what the fuck they're doing. They're just doing it. They're basically like a Pharisee, like someone who knows the words of the law, but they don't know the spirit of it. That's basically what King Rome is in Hyrule. They're a society of Pharisees.
Yeah, like Urbosa basically states this, that she threw herself into a pool of icy cold water to try to unlock her powers. No one has any idea how to do this. It's actually a travesty. And at some point, because she feels she's a failure, she, instead of embracing her role and her basically embracing heaven, she's obsessed with the material. The guardians are her solution.
And that's why the guardians are machines, because to a modern audience, a machine is a symbol that pretty much embodies the most materialistic thing you can think of. It's kind of like a living thing, but it's utterly material. It has no aspects of heaven in it. It's an autonomous, like, robot, and that's why in the game they don't have any clear direction either. They're creatures completely of the earth, presented in a symbol that a modern audience can understand, which is a machine.
Yeah, and the failure of the Hylians in that game is they put them on a pedestal, they idolize them, and look where that got them.
Yeah, no more idols, the pedestals must fall.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, though, because in Rohan's diary, he kind of understands this. He comes to terms with that he doesn't understand, like you said, Neph, he understands the law, but he doesn't understand the spirit of it. And he comes to terms with this in his own diary, where he explains that he hasn't been a father, he hasn't been supportive. He realizes that he has no freaking idea how to direct her.
He's basically like a fundamentalist, or just someone who's obsessed with the rules, but they don't know what the rules mean, and they don't know how to properly apply them to their lives and anyone else's lives. And that's that's how, you know, chaos undermines the order and things fall apart. And not
and
only that, it
fundamentalism,
drives
they
people
simplify
away
things to
from
bare
his
bones.
ideology too.
He's the tyrannical father.
Yeah, he's the tyrannical father. He is he is the representation of civilization gone bad.
Yeah.
The imposing of rules without understanding them.
Nah.
Whereas in
Yeah,
Wind
that's
Waker,
how order
Daphne's
goes
Nohansen
to
Hyrule is
evil.
the exact opposite. He's the wise king, the wise father. He realizes, you know, and he passes on that thing to the next generation too. So in Wind Waker, there's actually a successful passage of the traditions of the past to the future. Breath of the Wild is the opposite. It's a failure of that. And things are worse off, whereas in Wind Waker, things are getting better.
Well, in Wind Waker 2, they have people taking responsibility, fulfilling the roles. Even Ganondorf, his whole responsibility is that he wants to bring back a kingdom that he failed in a second attempt.
And that's why this idea of this idea of principalities and stuff is also why you don't like see Ganon, you know, rising from the ocean. Why he survived the flood in the first place. Because the character of Ganondorf in Wind Waker isn't actually Ganondorf. He is the person in that world that most embodies the idea of Ganondorf, and that idea can survive any you know, physical calamity like a flood.
Well,
and it's the same thing with Link. It's not literally Link. It's a kid embodying the idea of Link. And it's the same thing with Tetra. Like, that's why Tetra transforms into... She doesn't literally become Princess Zelda. She realizes that she's embodying the idea of Princess Zelda. And that's why her personality suddenly changes, too. It's the same thing with Zant and Twilight Princess. He fully succumbs to chaos, and that's why he's suddenly all wacky and crazy. Because they've accepted their role in some way. Holy moly, yeah.
One thing I was actually about in Wind Waker was whether this was the same Ganondorf on Ocarina of Time or a Ganondorf of a different timeline. They never really make it clear, A, because he looks different, B, because his behavior is so different, but I get the feeling that he was from Hyrule. And that...
Oh, yeah. The thing is, it is kind of implied he is the same Ganondorf, but in the end, it doesn't really matter.
No, it doesn't matter.
The
point is there is someone who functionally serves the purpose of Ganondorf in the story, and that is the point that I've been missing in all these Zelda games. And it's the same thing with myths and religion. Like, people seem to have a habit of being like, oh, this person, you know, they like to think of Thor as like an actual humanoid guy who's flying around through the sky whacking people, but that's not how the Norse people interpreted it. That is just a symbolic representation of all the ideas behind Thor. Basically, anyone can be Thor, and that idea is even in the original Marvel comics. Anyone can be Thor as long as they properly embody his ideals. There isn't an actual Thor. A guy just finds the hammer and he starts to embody the ideas of Thor.
Yeah,
which I prefer that idea.
And it's the same thing in any religion or mythology.
I just want to bring back, because we were talking about this, that, you know, the ones when you're assigned a role in this, you know, in this narrative, in the cosmic narrative,
called the meta divine.
Yeah, the meta divine essentially, and you reject it, whatever out of selfishness or fear or whatever, it makes you miserable, and that's basically this Zelda reflects this, and that's also why she despises Link quite a bit at the beginning, because he's so content, he's so perfect. But if you guys remember, when she actually talks to him and gets to know him, he's not accepting his role without any sort of hard feelings. You know, it's not easy for him. That's how Nintendo explains why he's such a quiet person, because he feels that, you know, the role he's playing is so important that he can't even speak. Like he has a hard time actually open up.
He doesn't want to add something of himself to the role. He wants the role to be presented in its purest possible form. Because that's another concept we didn't talk about. This idea of embodying roles. It's not a one-way street. Like, you don't just completely embody Ganondorf. Something of you is added to the role. Actually, we did talk about that earlier with the Joker and the actors that play him or whatever. Which is why every Link in Zelda is a little bit different, because the person that's embodying that role still has quirks of their own. And they're adding to that principality. They're adding sustenance to it with each time they manifest in the world. It's a really awesome idea, and I'm really sad that like no one fucking taught this to me in school or anything.
Well, like Demaco was a perfect example of this in that last cutscene where he's talking to Machora.
Yeah, he rejected his role of
wants-
playing the sky god that's supposed to chase away chaos.
But he doesn't want. He thinks he's not playing. But Majora reminds him of playing a part. You're just not doing a really good job at it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
we
the thing
are
is,
the
like, there's no...
masks we wear.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and
It's like-
that's why masks exist. A mask is visual shorthand to let the audience know that this person is embodying a role. And that's why Majora's followers
It's
in
sorta-
Hyrule Conquest wear the
Yeah.
mask. They're letting people know that I am not myself. I am playing this part to the utmost of my ability. Like, I am manifesting Majora to the best of my ability, that I'm not myself anymore. I'm Majora now. But they're not literally Majora. They are the idea of Majora in the world.
I think the best.
The best what?
I think the best like example of someone embodying an idea in the Zelda series comes from A Link Between Worlds, where after Yuga summons Ganon, he becomes Ganon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He serves his
And,
function.
and throughout the game, Yuga is basically like, he's in love with the idea of Ganon so much that he wants to embody it as best as he can. And he does. Well,
He's
sort of.
Ganon's
He
number
does
one
add a
fanboy.
bit of himself to the idea of Ganon after they have that failed
exactly.
gnosis.
That's why it's not called Ganon. That's why it's not Yuga. It's you Ganon.
Yeah, he's basically
Which is a
added...
dumb fucking name.
He like
Ganon,
Heath
I don't
Ledger
know.
to the Joker, Yuga has added a bit of his personality to the principality of Ganon. And now that
and
part
also-
is in the role of Ganon forever after that.
Yeah,
Well,
when
as such, the composite adds, the composite changes.
Yeah.
The more you add to that already existing character, the more complex the composite or archetype of that character changes a little. For example, Santa Claus isn't supposed to be red, but because of mass commercialization, we now see him as red. We don't.
That's
think of him
become
as
part of
anything
his
else.
principality, is the red outfit.
Yeah.
And another thing, like when we talk about Ganon and how different people can embody the different, different people can embody this concept of Ganon. It's the same. Like Ganon is just an embodiment of demise.
Yeah, and
And
that's why I
not
said
like-
earlier. There's a hierarchy of principalities. Like the principalities can
Demise is
embody
higher.
higher principalities, and so on and so forth.
Like every
like
time every time Ganondorf becomes Ganon, he's embodying the principality of demise.
Yes, and you could even say demise probably embodies the principality of malice or something.
Yeah.
It's unclear
And
what the
that's-
hierarchy is, but there is some kind of hierarchy there. They're
Yeah,
all
and-
embodying some primal idea of chaos in some way.
And that's what I was going into, is that, like we were talking about in a previous podcast, a lot of these ideas are lost in translation. Like, Demise's speech is really weird in English translation, and we don't really know what it means.
It's probably
but,
because the
it's
people
fair to-
translating it had a really materialist mindset, and they're
Yeah.
probably interpreting it too literally,
It's not a lit-
which is what
like,
I
from-
did.
Yeah, and how I interpret it from Japanese at least, and this can kind of be seen in the English version as well, because a curse can mean a lot of things. It doesn't need to be a literal curse that forces people to reincarnate in accordance with demise. That's kind of silly.
No,
Especially,
he's basically
like we were
saying,
talking
like, it doesn't matter if, you physically kill this body, this idea will always be here, and people will embody this idea in various forms to various degrees all throughout all of time and history, throughout this whole cycle of order
Yeah.
and chaos.
And that's what it says, he basically is saying that, an incarnation of my hatred will ever follow your kind. All are bound to this curse. It's not an actual curse, it's more of a statement of how the world works.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you get from the, the Japanese version, is that it talks about the malice. The malice is what follows.
And I would say
the
Skyward Sword, of all the games I can think of, have the most clear representations of order and chaos in the actual game, with Hylia and Demise and the two sword spirits. Like, in most Zelda games, like, there's not really like a clear, okay, here's order and here's chaos, or whatever. But in Skyward Sword, it's pretty distinct, and it's represented physically in the geography of the game too. Like, Demise is clearly, the chaos, or he's completely of the earth, and he's physically in the earth too. And his sword spirit, the Girahim, is also like a clear representation of chaos too, because he's just being pulled in all these directions. He's acting on impulse. He's like this completely earthly thing that only, And it's ironic that he so utterly serves demise, but he doesn't realize that he does because he's a slave to it. Whereas on the other side, you have
just look at his, quotation mark personality, quotation mark, is that, he's so vain. He's utterly obsessed with his own appearance. He's his physical form. He keeps saying, "Oh, look at me, I'm so magnificent," and whatnot. It illustrates this idea perfectly, what you're saying, is that he's completely off the earth. He's obsessed with the physical.
And then on and that's why he actually has humanoid characteristics too, because on the opposite end of the spectrum you have Hylia and Phi, and they are of the abstract of heaven, which is why Skyloft is up in the sky, and Hylia is her domain is somewhere off in the ether, and Phi, she represents she's the symbol of heaven perfectly. She's this abstract being that doesn't have any emotions or desires, and she's almost detached in a way. She seems kind of like a robot because of that, and it's even in her physical appearance. She almost has she doesn't have any pupils or anything. She's kind of this more...
She's completely featureless.
Yeah, she's this sort of almost formless thing that, is not quite embodied completely because she's, she's order.
Yeah.
And
I guess you could say that because I remember we were discussing this the last podcast, because we kind of concluded that Hylia's a bit of a dick in the sense that she kind of just left everyone else that were helping her in the war with demise back on the surface. But you could also see it in that way that because she is so she's a goddess and she's so attached to heaven, she doesn't really care.
Which is why she manifests as Zelda.
Yeah.
And why she can't use the Triforce. It makes sense now.
Yeah, and that's why
by being embodied through Zelda, she is basically attaching herself to the world so that she can more actively participate in it. Because without that, she's just this abstract idea that exists in some weird supernatural, whatever you want to call it. She's too abstracted to actually participate in the world.
Yeah, it sort of mirrors Christianity with Jesus Christ.
Yes, exactly. He's basically the gnosis between the abstract and the physical, so that the abstract can actually manifest in the world in some way and do good things. That's exactly that idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The interesting thing, though, is there's only ever been one synthesis in all the Zelda games, as far as I can tell, and that's Birbddha. And I think that's one of the reasons I subconsciously liked that character so much, because here in the West, that's because I'm raised in the West, and the West is really Christianized, and the victory condition, if you will, in Christianity is a synthesis, embodying someone like Jesus Christ, and that's basically Birbddha successfully has synthesis. So in my Western mindset, I see that, I'm like, yeah, I like that character. That character's doing something right. And now I'm consciously aware of it. Yes, I know what that is. But I didn't know what it was. I knew what it was on a subconscious level. And now I can properly articulate it because she undergoes some kind of synthesis. And I think that's why a lot of people like her. Well, she successfully integrates chaos into her being and makes it work with order.
I'd like to, point out that someone has said that, we're are we actually taking in hot air? And, the possibility is always there, but as they say, regardless of what the writer intended, you can always find symbolism in things. And it doesn't really matter if it was intentional or not.
It seems to just be built into our brains.
Yeah, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about a trend in how narratives are constructed. We're not trying to analyze necessarily what the author originally meant, because that's you'll never know that. It's kind of like with the Worship Down or whatever, where all these people try to analyze it, but the author kind of said, yeah, it's just
Oh, is that the one with the rabbits and
it's just a book about rabbits.
Yeah,
but
about war.
Even if that's true, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, because people still see symbols in it, even if the author didn't intend it. It's like a Tool album. People can associate different meanings to it, whether it's metaphysical or about drugs or about murder. In the end of the day, the the guy who wrote the song Menyard will still say, "No, man, the song is about anal sex. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's not that deep, you loser."
It's kind of like...
I'm convinced, though, there's at least someone, at Nintendo that understands this stuff, because it seems properly done in quite a few games. Like the moment I finished learning about all of this stuff, and then I looked at Zelda, like it wasn't even like, it was literally in 10 minutes. I'm just like, oh crap. I've been looking at this whole thing the wrong way. I've been looking at everything. Like I said, I had been interpreting the Zelda games like literal events that happened. A series of historical events with literal characters in a sequential sequence. And that's not what it is. The Legend of Zelda is a series of myths in a cycle.
Well, now you're seeing it more like he's comics. He doesn't get wrapped in like inconsistencies with the costume or how old someone is and how old they're supposed to be. He's more thinking about it in a metaphysical way, like the way you're supposed to think of myths.
And
like
myths and religious stories too, which is why if you take like a myth or a religious story literally, it doesn't quite align with the physical world and what we see. It's just like, well, this is confusing. Like, how is Thor shooting lightning out of his hammer? What are the mechanisms? Yeah. The point isn't that there's a guy with a hammer shooting lightning. The point is there is a person who embodies the idea of Thor acting in the world. It doesn't matter that he's literally shooting lightning out of his hammer. He's embodying the idea, and it probably isn't literally shooting out lightning or whatever. He's just embodying that archetype in the world. It's an actor playing a part. So I guess the proper way to see the world, and this is how all of the ancient civilizations saw it, and George Lucas was going to do this in his new Star Wars movies that he never got to make, but everyone saw the world like a stage, and everyone is kind of like an actor, and the actors have to figure out how to properly embody their parts. And the more you properly embody your part, the more you'll succeed. And the more you fight against it, the more you'll become bitter and nihilistic.
There's one thing I want to do, like, when we're talking about, even if the writers or whoever is in charge, like, it's very unclear. I've been trying to make sense of the development process of Zelda games for years, and sometimes it's really messy. The point is, it doesn't really matter, because I also think that there are people on the team that are aware of certain things, and it's very easy to see it. If you go and pick up the Masterworks, it's getting translated finally to English right now. They are aware of a lot of. They are going to such deep detail on the most mundane things.
Yeah.
And even in the entire chapter about Sunai in the Masterworks, they're talking about how their culture is expressed through symbolism. Mm-hmm. That the boar embodies power, the dragon embodies courage, and the owl embodies wisdom.
Yeah.
That is nowhere in the game.
Nowhere.
The statues are in the game. Without context, you don't necessarily know what they mean.
So that there's someone on the team who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, like, why would they even bother to write that if they don't care? That's an interesting
thought. Right. Sorry, I had to check on something.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
But that's what I mean. Like, it does. In the end, though, it doesn't really matter what they what they intended, because that's not really what you're doing. Because the best way to interpret the work is to go directly up to the author and ask them, like, what did you mean by this? That's not how narratology and stuff like works. That's why we're still analyzing poetry.
Yeah.
It's also a sort of I guess it's a sort of thinking exercise. You're pondering about things that are quite difficult to find and conceptualize. But in the end, if the author intended it or not, it doesn't really matter, because again, if you really want to know what they intended, then you should go and ask them.
I forgot what the heck I was about to say.
Yeah, I do believe that there are people on the team that care more than maybe some other the people up in the hierarchy on the team, because pick up the Masterworks, look at any interview or art, like designer notes from the artists. They put in a ton of work.
Yeah.
And nothing is random. If you're an artist, then you pull inspiration from a myriad of sources.
Yeah.
Or a myriad of sources. So there are people on the team that probably think more about this than the actual game director.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there is symbolism in the game. Pretty obvious that Hylia is a very symbolic character. Her entire deal of sort of reincarnating into mortal form is extremely symbolic.
Yeah.
She's
And
basically becoming less
of...
abstracted because someone in the world is more properly embodying her.
Yeah,
which is how she disappears for so long and then comes back, because she's an idea, not a literal lady running around in the sky with wings. She is an idea that exists in the abstract.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why she's able to come back after which is what Jesus did.
And to another degree, even Zelda, like I said earlier, Zelda, Link, and Ganondorf, they are abstract principalities that are embodied by people. The appearance of the person doesn't matter. Functionally, they serve that role in the story, and that's why they show up in this endless cycle of myth that is the Legend of Zelda, just like every other myth in history, and just like in all the religions.
I also want to point out that I know what the meaning Happy Ball with mantling in the Elder Scrolls, but mantling is not exclusive to the Elder Scrolls. You can find examples of it in a ton of mythology that predates anything modern. The idea of a god it's not a physical thing, but more of an idea. It's a very ancient concept. It's not... Kirkbride took that idea from mythology because he thought it was an interesting concept.
Well, even George Lucas was gonna do it too. A few 2 or 3 months ago, George Lucas was talking about what he would have done if he made episode 7, 8, and 9. And he basically said, in 7, 8, and 9, you were going to find out that there were these abstract beings called the Wills. And basically they use the Force to interact with the material world. And you find out that the people in the material world, he used the word controlled by them, but I'm certain he got that idea from how ancient people saw the world. We're like actors embodying these ideas in the physical world.
Yeah.
It's a two-way street. It's not a one-way thing. It's not like the abstract thing is controlling you like a puppet, and it's not like you are controlling the abstract idea. It goes both ways. Like, you add a bit of you to the abstract idea, and the abstract idea shapes you in a way too. It's like the idea of like a nation and a culture. Like, your language and your culture shapes you against your will, but you can still add something to that culture through your individuality, and that nation becomes a principality.
But that's why this sounds so familiar to the Elder Scrolls, because Kirkbride is a huge fan of mythology. I mean, just look at one of his characters like Vivek. Vivek is synthesis incarnate. He's both divine, mortal. He's also embodying both the sexes.
He's a successful synthesis in the Elder Scrolls universe.
Kirkbride is a huge mythology fan, and he is a big fan of Hinduism especially, and also Norse mythology. I mean, a lot of the older Skylore before Bethesda decided to simplify it is very Norse, to the point it's kind of funny.
Skyrim is basically like carbon ripoff of Norse.
That's the thing. Like, when you take these ideas and put it into your work, like, you could say it's a ripoff, but I'd say that these things are so...
No, it's not a ripoff. It's a pattern you can't escape.
Yeah, they are.
The only thing you can change is, add your own little bit of individuality through like your art or imagery or something. That's the only thing you can change is, I guess, the skin of it. But you can't change the the skeleton or the spirit, if you will. You can't change that part of it. You can only manifest it in a certain...
You can only
what?
Like, I really like the Elder Scrolls, but it's not original whatsoever.
You don't even need to be
amazing. You don't.
You can just mix and match it in a way. Like, I was just gonna say, Dark Souls is pretty much archetypes and tropes being used over and over again, and it's self-aware enough to at least make it part of the main plot.
I think give that question.
There's a...
What?
Huh?
Like, the entire, the entire deal with Demako turning into tree.
Oh yeah. I guess I'll go ahead and spell out the whole thing. Basically, Demoko's order, his Sky Kingdom and everything, came crashing down to the earth or whatever. His order was destroyed through a process of chaos, and this is the idea of like Ragnarok or Revelations or whatever. This idea that some kind of new order comes from all of this destruction or this chaotic process or whatever. Because in the story of Ragnarok, there's like this huge battle with all the mortals and the gods and stuff, and everything gets destroyed. But then something like new and hopefully better comes from all of that destruction. It's the same thing with the story of Revelations and the New Testament. There's this, the seven-headed serpent, this agent of chaos who undermines the existing order of the world. All of this, shit happens. Everything gets destroyed and everything's ruined, and then a new order comes from that chaos. And in the New Testament, it's represented by the New Jerusalem, which is kind of like symbolically presented as like this cube around the Garden of Eden or whatever. Yeah. Basically, the tree thing is a symbol of there's like a new order that's been created from all of this chaos that just happened. Because the tree is basically the symbol for order in the human psyche. Like Demoko's order is gone, it's been destroyed, and a new thing is coming forth from it. It hasn't quite grown yet, and it's starting to manifest in the world.
Yeah.
And that's what the symbolism of that tree is at the end there when Demoko dies. His order, his part to play is gone, and now someone new is going to embody that part, and there's going to be some new kind of order that comes from it.
Well, and from death comes life. Dark Souls with the giants.
Tedster, I forgot to like the sages actually I think are an even better idea of the principalities in the Zelda series. Like that's why there's this sort of implication that they have to die first to become sages. They basically have to become abstracted. They have to become an idea.
But they don't want to.
And then they can embody like whatever it is they're the sage of.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Medli is not a literal descendant of Larudo. She is the person at that time in the Great Sea that most embodies the idea of Larudo. And Larudo herself probably embodies, they all embody the Sage of Earth or whatever. I can't remember if Medli was Earth or Wind, but...
Yeah.
Medli was Wind.
Earth. No, I think Medli's actually Earth. I think they like flipped it in Windwaker where Makar is the Wind and Medli is Earth.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Wind, Medli's Earth.
Yeah. It's a subversion.
Yeah. We could talk about, the inversion or the upside down if you want, but I forgot where I was going with the tree thing.
Well, yeah, as I was... A lot of this parallels with Dark Souls 2, from Death Comes Life. When the giants die, or wiped out to extinction, the trees grow, so now they serve like a different purpose. They are a representation of nature, faceless. They kind of lack an identity that humans can relate to, but even then, they still serve a purpose in the cosmic order of things. And in Dark Souls,
Koroks.
The Koroks are literally bringers of order in Wind Waker. They go around planting trees, which that's the symbol of order.
Well, yeah, but
they're bringing order to the Great Sea.
Interesting thing in Dark Souls, though, is that the whole thing about like the gods unable to adapt or accept the fact that their time is ending. Even then, their archetypes are still being reincarnated over and over again. Like in Dark Souls 2. You fight not the reincarnations, but sort of, it's represented more literally. For example, there are people who encompass the souls of the bosses in Dark Souls 1, the villains in Dark Souls 1. Their souls have been transferred to other beings who are now fulfilling their role. In Dark Souls 2, a entity called the Rotten is basically a manifestation of Nito, First of the Dead. And you've got a whole bunch of characters whose powers and whose titles are being reinterpreted, rewritten, reorganized. It's like through idolization, they don't actually die.
Yeah.
Archetypes still live on, And one can wonder that in the sages kind of want that to happen, but they refuse to become abstraction. They prefer to look at Earth and do things the simpler way.
Yep, that's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah.
And
the sages don't want but Demoko, as you said, he's looking at Earth. He's not looking at the sky.
Oh yeah, Majora literally says that. Like your mind was set to the Earth because Demoko. I don't want to spoil anything about the Triforce. I know some of the people in this conversation know about it, but basically, Demoko.
I don't.
Oh, you don't? Okay, well, I'm not gonna spoil it. If you want to know, you can ask me after the conversation. But what the heck was I gonna say? Yeah, Demoko. What the heck was I gonna say about Demoko? I can't remember. Whatever, it must not have been important. Yeah, he's a bird.
Sorry.
That's all right. Let me read some of the comments in the chat. Fire and the forest sages only have 2 halos in your stained glass. I'm not sure what Teddy's getting at.
Ted's asking a question. She's angry at me.
Oh, actually, no. That isn't intentional. That's a mistake. But going with this idea of principalities, you can interpret it as Daikon and Sulcaris. They were active.
Everything has a purpose.
all the mistakes. It wasn't a mistake. It was done on purpose. You just weren't conscious of it.
Yeah.
To quote Bob Ross, we don't make mistakes, just happy little accidents.
Yeah, basically.
I guess that's one way of interpreting it.
Yeah. But one question that people must be asking is, like, Majora's endgame. Do we think that he's going to try to establish a new order? Is his entire pathos is, I'm just going to keep causing chaos over and over again? Because, that is my function. I do think one of the reasons...
fully embraced his role.
Yeah.
And,
I think that's
an element of, embracing chaos is insanity and a lack of true direction, which is why Majora has become insane.
Well, and that's also the reason...
That's what?
Well, that's also the reason why Majora is stronger than the other Druid. Or, well, he's not technically a Druid anymore.
No, he's not.
But he's fulfilling his role really well.
Yes,
and that's why
it's like the idea of, like, Batman, someone who puts on the idea in the Old Testament is the skin of death. You put on, it's literally represented as skin, because your skin is literally cells that are dying in order to keep you alive. But the skin of death is this idea that you wear. You put on this sort of thing of the earth to protect your insides from the chaos outside, and that's basically what Majora's done. Which, if anyone's been paying attention, I've been mentioning how the Lord of the Mountain, those little things have Majora eyes. There's something to that, but Majora's basically put on a skin of death because he's protecting himself from the part that he's playing. He knows he's playing a part, and he's not actually that thing.
Well, also, guys, if you want to understand why Majora's servants turn into snakes, we've basically been discussing that for 2 hours. Just commenting that.
I mean, I guess obviously, there are certain ways that the things we're talking about. Like I think you said it in the beginning, it's basically very spoilery. If you understand where we're going with all this, and or if you're familiar with myth, you kind of can guess where it's going. But the thing, obviously there's not going to be an exact copy of every myth, because every myth is different.
Because the people embodying those ideas bring some of their own personality to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always going to add to it.
Even though there are
what?
Burb, you're twitching out, man.
Yeah.
You're twitching out. Oh my god.
Sorry.
I think I heard something.
It's gonna absorb all of us. No.
Anyway, what I was gonna say is, damn it, what was I gonna say now? I lost it.
The chaos.
I'm losing my mind to chaos.
His mind. It's gonna be absorbed. His head is gonna turn into...
I can't for the life of me remember what I was gonna say now.
Yeah.
Oh well. Must not have been important.
What I was going to say is that even though myth and religious stories have a lot of similarities, they're not exactly the same story.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say. I was going to say that I think.
Yeah, just go on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say that I think Tolkien understood this idea perfectly, and he has this idea of influencing the principalities or whatever in Lord of the Rings with the Valar. When Iluvatar creates the world, he doesn't, just snap his fingers and then everything is as it is. He has the Valar sing it into existence, and they add a bit of their personality to that symphony. And then
their positive vibes, yes.
Yes, and then, things go wrong when there's someone like Melkor who doesn't want to play. He doesn't even want to put part of his personality into that part. He wants to become that part. He wants to be the part, basically, and that's when he goes off on his own and he creates, this sort of disharmony or chaos or whatever. Like, I think Tolkien understood this idea perfectly of how the individuals add a bit of their personality to whatever it is that they're embodying. Yeah. Like, right down to the creation of the world itself.
Well, Burbs was going to say, it's the Joker. The Joker thing is where the story is the same, but it adds to a bit of personality, with the actors who are portraying
again, it's not a one-way street. The principality does not control you like a puppet, but you don't control the principality. It's a two-way street. They both influence each other and manifest in a certain way. And it's really cool. And this makes Zelda make sense. Like, it's kind of crazy.
Well, in God, I can't believe I'm drawing from this story, but in Infinite Crisis, it's a Grant Morrison DC comic. The way Superman beats the vampire that's feeding off the essence of the multiverse is that he basically becomes an abstraction, and he doesn't have the ability to literally beat a creature that eats reality. But because he serves a cosmic purpose of being a Deus Ex Machina, he basically ascends to becoming a literal Deus Ex Machina, and he stops the bad guy because that's the cosmic purpose he plays in comics. He's always the good guy. He's the plot point that's going to save the day. So he beats him not literally, but through a meta narrative in which he ascends and becomes the thought robot. I know that's a really that's a pull, but that's basically a parallel.
There's no escaping these patterns. They keep showing up, And the thing that seems to be the case is, like, even if you're not aware of them, they'll show up, but in like a fragmented kind of form. And the more aware of it you are, the more you can kind of cohesively fit it all together, which is, I think, why something like Lord of the Rings is so popular, because Tolkien was conscious of this stuff.
Well, were you not conscious when you made basically King David from the Bible, in the sense that he comes from an ancient bloodline that's supposed to save the Jews?
I think I was conscious of that because I'm really familiar with all the stories of King David. Like, I've read all the Old Testament, and I've read all the parts of King David. And the thing is, King Gustav is also kind of like King David too. I actually intentionally had that in the first mission. He's fighting the Goliath, which is Sulcaris. He's fighting a giant, which is, at that point of the story, Sulcaris is like a Nephilim too, and Nephilim are giants. She's like this failed gnosis between Amonis and the physical or whatever. But anyway, that's going into too much detail. But yeah, Gustav and Link.
Watch it if you haven't.
No. Anyway, what I was gonna say is, no, actually, Gustav is more like King David. Link is more like the descendant of King David. So you could probably say Link is kind of like a little mini Jesus in a way.
Well, the way I connected is that Link is the Jewish version of a Messiah. He is the genetics of David coming in to save Hyrule. Helia is the more Christian version of the Messiah. In that.
Well, Helia achieves a literal gnosis between earth and heaven, but I don't want to spoil too much for the people who don't know the story like you guys.
Of course. But it is interesting how you can kind of tie a lot of those biblical themes together into a series that is about triangles and stopping a wizard from taking triangles.
This was not intentional, but King David, King Gustav has an affair. And that results in the bloodline. That was not intentional.
Oh my god.
That was not intentional on my part. I just thought it would be interesting if Gustav had a secret affair with Sirach. King David had an affair with what's-her-face.
The archetype of David, basically. The archetype of David
was embodying itself through my work. And I was only half aware of it.
Oh, I'm sorry, Catcher, for spoiling the Bible.
Really, and it makes sense because I've recently read those stories over the last few years, so it's really fresh in my mind.
Yeah. But I'm glad you're drawing from more sources, though, because that's important.
I told you, I'm drawing from all kinds of religions, even from Gnosticism and just even materialist things like Gaia theory. I'm kind of drawing from everything.
Well, the thing about it is, I believe that when you're reinterpreting work, and I think I was talking to Deox about this too, you have an obligation to draw from a bunch of different sources, try and create a narrative that reimagines the world in a different way.
And that's what Tolkien did. That's why Tolkien used so much pagan imagery in his stuff, despite the fact that he was a Roman Catholic, because he recognized, okay, there's truth in these stories. It's just not as refined as, what he thought was the most refined version of how, consciousness manifests himself, which would be Roman Catholicism for him.
Yeah. But he mixed it up with a lot of paganism too. If you were just drawing from Zelda by itself, many people complain of like, why are you drawing so much from this stuff? Why don't you just draw it from Zelda? If you were just
Zelda
drawing from
itself
Zelda,
is drawing from
limiting
things
yourself.
too. Which I wouldn't mind getting into the idea of the alternate worlds and stuff in just a second. Deox and I were talking about that just before we started the stream. Something else we realized.
What, multiverse theory? Or like
no,
collective unconscious?
All of the parallel worlds in Zelda aren't like alternate universes. They're like in Norse mythology. They're the other aspects of the world, like Jotunheim and Midgard and Asgard and all of that. That's what things like the Dark World and the Silent Realm and the Realm of Twilight are. They're not alternate universes. They are aspects of Hyrule in like their plainest form that you can go to, symbolically represented as a physical place you could travel to.
Yeah, which is.
And we're trying to figure out which one's which. We're pretty certain the Realm of Twilight is Jotunheim because it's the place on the border of order and chaos, or light and darkness. It's the land of the exiled, and the Twilight are descended from the exiled dark interlopers. So.
Oh yeah. I think the Twilight perfectly embodied the I guess the principality of the outlaw. The ones that have been banished.
They're Australia. It's cosmic
or Australia, yeah. So but they were outlawed, yet they seek something within the garden. They wish to return to, and that's because the entire idea of being outlawed or exiled from the community, the garden. If you put yourself in the feet of a Norse person back in, let's say, Iceland, in in the Viking Age, if you were expelled from your community, you were pretty much fucked.
You had to turn into a monster to survive.
You'd seek to. And another thing is that very fun with outlawry is that laws did not protect you. You are not protected by order anymore. So anyone that could literally walk up to you and, like I told Nephy, slash your face up, and then there would be no repercussions. Yeah. Because the outlawed are not protected by order.
So I'm certain that the Realm of Twilight is Hyrule's equivalent of Jotunheim.
Yeah.
I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but...
But, I think it's symbolically they're very similar. And I think it's probably due to that, their stories kind of align.
Teddy, the Bifrost is probably like the Mirrors of Twilight, or just the means with which to go between the different aspects of the world. It's more literal in certain Zelda games, like in Twilight Princess. It's this literal physical portal you could see. In A Link Between Worlds, isn't it like cracks in the earth or something?
Yeah.
And that's probably just the culture at the time, adding their own little personality as to what they see the bridge between worlds as. So
I think
you could interpret the title of Link Between Worlds being The Legend of Zelda: The Bifrost.
I think the Twilight and Hyrule Conquest also perfectly embodies this idea of the outlaw. Because they still there's basically where they live is fucked, because they're not in the conformity of the garden. They've been thrown out of it. Generally, they are on the border between order and chaos. That's not a good place to be, relatively speaking.
Yeah, it's because one of my problems with the Zelda series has been this idea, because I hate the idea of like parallel universes and alternate timelines and stuff. I feel like it's kind of like a crutch to basically get an excuse to do whatever the heck you want. But I don't think that's what these worlds are. I think they're like the worlds in Norse mythology, or even they're the same things are in Egyptian mythology. They're not different worlds. They are aspects of the whole world, kind of manifesting in sort of a specific way, and you go there to find something or some kind of knowledge or whatever. And it's different depending on the story, but so I guess the sacred realm is Asgard.
Yeah. But like yeah, the Asgard is the ideal.
And the Dark World is... I'm not sure if I'd say the Dark World... I think the Dark World is the one where the dwarves and the Dark Elves are. I can't pronounce it. It's like... some Norse word with an S.
Gesundheit.
That's what I think the Dark World is.
I was just going to say that I think it's interesting that...
Muspelheim, I guess that's it.
You were discussing... I don't know if it's a spoiler or not, but Gustav isn't really that well known in Hyrule Conquest, right?
No,
like the people of the world.
Yeah, it's kind of like that idea in Breath of the Wild. Like they know who he is in a historical sense, but they don't know anything about him, I guess.
Well, it parallels Breath of the Wild. The failure to pass on knowledge.
Yes.
People aren't modeling themselves or using Gustav as a sort of inspiration.
And they're
kind of forgetting on him.
And that's what Link is. Link is basically the connection between the tradition of the past to all the shit that's going down in Hyrule right now. He's the
ideal.
He's the wisdom and the knowledge and all of the mistakes of the past being brought forth to solve the current problem because everyone else has forgotten. Everyone's forgotten, their bloodlines and traditions and stuff. And, Hyrule's progressively moving towards chaos because of that.
Well, what do you think's the biggest problem with Hyrule right now? Being the goddesses, but, like, they're not really understanding who the goddesses are.
Yeah, they have no idea who the goddesses are or their Are you talking about in Hyrule Conquest or Canon?
Hyrule Conquest.
Yeah, in Hyrule Conquest, they have no idea who the goddesses are or, like, what their goals are. And in their actual doctrines and their orthodoxy, they even say, like in Canon, the goddesses just left us and we have no idea what the hell they want. They've forgotten. Let's
build a church for them. I'm sure they give a... like, I'm sure it's not gonna bite us in the ass. It is an odd thing to do, yeah. You got all these other, solutions, that you can work with, but they seem to be avoiding that. But now that Demaco has revealed, that the sages be worshipped, it's going to call into question whether the goddesses should be, taken seriously as well.
Kind of like how Link sort of led to the sages being exposed, he's going to lead to the knowledge of the goddesses coming back to the world. I don't want to spoil what they are. You guys have seen some images I have of them, but I'm not spoiling too much about them. Kind of like Princess Zelda is that link for Hylia to come back into the world.
I feel like... Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go on. I don't think I was going to say anything beyond that.
No. I was actually going to say that Demaco, he's perfectly encompasses canon Hylia in a way, but like in the worst case scenario. She, canon Hylia... is basically a goddess turned human in a way. And in Skyward Sword, she fucks up because, well, you could say she succeeds, but she relies too heavily on a guy to get the job done for her. Like Demaco has so little faith in himself that he, instead of confronting Solcaris, he instead chooses to let Solcaris do what she does down.
He is afraid to leave his garden to confront chaos, and the thing is, you have to leave, or sooner or later that snake is going to come into your garden and fuck it up. That's the story. That's the medieval dragon story. The medieval dragon story is you need to leave your castle and go confront chaos on your terms, because if you don't, the dragon eventually is going to come and burn down the castle on its terms, and you won't be prepared for it. And that's exactly what happens to Demaco.
Yeah. And the snakes finally come in.
That's the idea of the walled city, and the Tiamat story, and a lot of these stories with where there's a chaos dragon. There's this idea of the walled city, and it's in the Pacific Rim movie too. But Guillermo del Toro is 100% aware of all this crap, and it's in all of his movies.
Do you think Demaco would have won if he had confronted the deal earlier?
If he embraced his role, Hyrule would not be corrupted at all, and things would probably be progressing.
He would have had
to its logical conclusion.
Yeah.
But he was selfish and wanted to change the world into a way that he thought suited him best, and and same thing with the other sages too.
Just to add, because someone asked, what the image was, and someone said, it depicts kind of the origin of Link, but also it also ties into what we've been talking. What we've been talking about for the last hour or hours. It's also a very good depiction of Hyrule Conquest Hyrule. It is the garden, you can see.
You mean the image garden that I have up right now?
Yeah. The ideal is in the center, surrounded by the fence. it is literally the garden.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depicts the world as well and how it's perceived by the denizens of Hyrule.
Yeah, which is an interesting depiction of the sages being owls, just like how in the Divine Comedy Jesus was a phoenix. Really odd. Tetster wanted to ask about like how the sages try to play God. I mean, they must know that the goddesses exist, but it seems like they're just not respecting the status quo. They know
they don't want to. They don't want to accept the fact that they've been given roles to play. They just want to do things their own way. They want to be like little gods.
Yeah. They
create like these abomination things to kind of enact their will. They create little Nephilim, so to speak, and it just leads to destruction.
It's interesting how the Drufins complete reflections of each other.
The what?
They're so alike.
Oh, the demons or whatever.
The demons. The demons and the sages are so. The demons and the sages are so like. I mean, the Drufs and the stages are so like each other.
Yes,
they end up filling the role of Nephilim.
They're almost like that sort of idea of duality and like everything.
The two extremes end up reflecting each other the most.
And
the one that
they all come to a head-to-head with each other.
Yeah. In fact, Majora's sticks out the most because you could say he's sort of this weird. He's either beyond or sort of like a synthesis of those two sides because he's a dark, ominous force, but he also has this heavenly wisdom.
No, he's not. He's not a synthesis. He's just unlike the sages and the demons. He's
chaos. Yeah.
No, he's willingly embraced his role. He's put on that skin of death. He's an actor. He's acting out a part, and he embraces it. And that's why he can't be defeated, hypothetically speaking, until other people start playing their proper parts. That's the only way he could be stopped.
Which is why at one moment he can be insane and crazy, and the other minute he's poised and calm, which is something people were pointing out. I mean, it's interesting that
he basically broke character for a second there to point out, because Demoko broke character technically.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, and that's why he briefly broke character and was like, "Man, dude, you fucked up your part in the play, man. What's wrong with you? What the hell, man? You ruined the play. Now I gotta fuck shit up. Bye."
We gotta cast new actors. We gotta cast new directors for this shit.
Yeah, and Majora's like, "Damn it! Now I gotta find a new actor to play Demoko. Damn it!
It's like the
it took me 10,000 years to find you, buddy."
The principality is the role, and the characters who are named are actors. And that's basically what it all comes down to. And I think one of the it seems as if it's not, by the way, trying to be a slave and allow that role to define you. It's to play that role the best you can.
Yeah, again, it's not a one-way street. You're not like a puppet. You are an actor in a play, and you bring your own bit of you to the part.
But I think people misunderstand that a lot. Like when people talk about manifest destiny, they hate the idea of being no free will.
Yes, this is where the idea of predestination comes from in something like Calvinism. They're interpreting it in a way where you're a puppet, but that's not it. You're an actor, not a puppet. You're an actor with a will of your own, but you gotta play the part.
Yeah, and it's not like the archetypes. Well, you could interpret the archetypes as being alive and malevolent, like Lovecraft did, but it's more like they're just. It's their nature. The ideas just exist, and you can encompass those ideas that benefit you or benefit the world at large. There are ideas that I think are better than others in terms of what you want. For example, if you're encompassing an idea that is inherently harmful and violent, and you're willingly doing this with no regard of the people around you, you're an idea that needs to be squashed. The idea you're encompassing needs to be squashed.
And that would be portrayed as something like a demon or an Asura in Christianity and Hinduism. They're ideas that basically they're just bad ideas because they're so focused on the earth.
You're not a puppet because you have free will. You choose to play the part, and we can see, for example, since this is a Zelda podcast as well. You look at Breath of the Wild Zelda. She has a choice if she wants to play the part or not.
And for most of the game, she's not playing the part of Princess Zelda, which is why, before I understood this stuff, I hated her. Because I know this character is not Princess Zelda. She is not acting as this idea of Princess Zelda I have in my head. And for a brief moment in the game, she does. And that's, when she has this kind of gnosis, and she gains her super Hylia powers, because for a brief moment she does properly embody the idea of Zelda. So the reason I hated her is because that was the point. The point is she's not fully Zelda in the game, and she's trying to figure out how to be Zelda.
She's a bushy brown teen girl who just happens to be named Zelda, but doesn't like the idea of it. It's like
she was an actor given a part, and no one told her how to play the part, and she has no idea how to play it. So she's trying to figure out, what to do. Except she's going about it the wrong way. She's being completely selfish about it, and her mind is entirely on the earth and earthly things, and that's why she can't manifest her powers through most of the game.
And that's the thing, like, you can refuse to play the role that you've been given, but then you have to deal with consequences, and then you have to reflect if, you denying your role is worth those consequences. And that's kind of what she does. When she realizes everyone she loves is dead because she failed to play her part, she can either, accept that fact, actually try to play her part, or she can deny it and run away. But the matter of fact is you have to deal with the consequences of it.
She could either become like Midna or like Zant, or a more ancient example, Abel or a Cain.
Yeah.
You could really kind of boil every person down to someone like Abel or Cain, a person who voluntarily accepts their role and makes the appropriate sacrifices to deal with chaos. That would be Abel. He's described as, making the proper sacrifices that pleases the cosmos or God or whatever, and then... Or you could end up being like Cain, which is, someone like Zant or,
Mido.
Mido. Someone who doesn't want to accept the fact that there's chaos in the world. They don't want to accept their part, and they're making an improper sacrifice, and it's making them bitter and ultimately self-destructive and nihilistic. And, that's what happens in the Old Testament story. Like, actually, the Old Testament story takes it one step further. Cain kills any example of the opposite so that he has nothing to look up to. He kills Abel. So he's like, look, now Abel doesn't exist. This idea no longer exists. Therefore, I'm the only thing that can be embodied.
Well, also, it's no...
And the universe is like, fuck you.
it's
and exiles him to the realm of Twilight.
It's no coincidence, too, that he is eternally tainted. It's represented by his family, who are all reflections of failures. Even if they have the wisdom or the strength or the power to be better people, they end up, digging his name even worse, which is why he's so horrified by the legacy he's created that he even runs away from his own legacy. He can't take any form of consequences, and that's Mido to a T.
Yeah.
He just, everywhere he goes, he fucks up, and he can't take it. So, where he's going to go after the Goma, we don't know. But,
well, he embodies something a little more chaotic. Some of you know.
Yeah.
He assumes a new identity because he takes on a new part.
He doesn't like himself. That's why he doesn't like himself, which is why he's constantly trying to be someone else. In fact, in the old canon, trivia you got on YouTube, if you've not read Nephy's old stories, Mido became Dark Link, But now that's not going to be the case. But it is interesting
he contributes to Dark Link in the current canon, so to speak. Yeah.
Sorry, I remember things. It's been a while since I played
him and several others. I don't want to spoil too much.
But it is interesting how he's such a character. This is self-loathing, and he's a victim of himself.
He's basically he's a little Cain. He didn't like the part the order the Deku Tree had for him, and he grew bitter and resentful. And he's like, I want to be king of the garden. I don't want to be just a little chief. I want to pick my queen. Me. He basically it's boiled down to just outright selfishness.
That's the thing that, talking about playing your role and being unwilling, because I had an interesting conversation about this with another friend, and he pointed out that Zelda does try, in Breath of the Wild, she is actually trying to play a role to achieve that, the complete embodiment of the principality she's meant to fulfill. However, she doesn't succeed for the large majority of her life, and I personally think that it's because she doesn't, it's not genuine.
It's not genuine. She's faking.
Yeah, and there's that scene, where you made a meme out of Nephy, where she kind of
just slaps the water.
Yeah.
She looks like she's farting.
Right after that, sometimes after that, she's back at the castle focusing on the material, the guardians, and then her father's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she's trying to escape it, and that makes me believe that even though she tried, she wasn't genuine about it.
No, her mind was entirely on the earth.
Yeah, there was at least a part, she tried because it was expected of her. Mm-hmm. But in order to play a role, you need to really want to play the role.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have about it, you're not going to put up a good performance. And this happens in real life. You've heard from actors from movies they hated. They usually aren't that good in that movie.
Yep.
Because in order to play in order to play in order to act as well as you can, you kind of need to immerse yourself in the role and accept it.
You need to fully embody the thing that's why an actor like Daniel Day-Lewis is probably so good, because Daniel Day-Lewis literally convinces himself that he is that character. Like when he was what movie was it? There's one movie where like he's in a wheelchair. He basically never got out of his wheelchair even when they weren't filming. He fully embodied that character, and I think it was The Last of the Mohicans. He learned how to actually build a house and stuff, and just lived in a tent out in the wilderness while they're filming. He fully embraces the idea that he's an actor, that he's not himself when he brings a bit of himself to the part. But I think that's why Daniel Day-Lewis is considered such a great actor, because he really embraces this idea of it's not about me, it's about the principality that I'm embodying.
Which is why go on, sorry.
No, you can go on.
Deox, no, Deox, you go on. I had a point that I was going to introduce that's not going to work. ADHD moment. Yeah.
It's okay. No, but what I was going to say was that regardless, if you're not genuine about playing your role, you're going to fail. And that's the entire point of Zelda, because she does actually try, and I just want to stress, because it's not like she completely denies it.
That's probably why she ends up succeeding and doesn't become like another Avatar of Demise or Ganon or whatever, because she's failing. But her intentions aren't her selfishness comes from the failure of the previous generation.
Yeah.
Her father and that culture, and that's the idea of original sin, or the sins of the fathers. This idea of the past generations, they can be responsible for something that you are not responsible for, but because of the way reality works, you're going to have to deal with the consequences of what they did. I use the example, like say some nation like nukes a city or something, or like nukes themselves, and everything becomes irradiated.
Canada,
it's not the children's fault that the whole area is full of radiation and stuff, but they still have to live with the consequences of it. And that's the idea of original sin, and sins of the father. Like everything you do will affect the next generation, and if you fuck up too much, it's just this endless cycle, or not an endless cycle. Like it can't actually go the other direction, but it's the cycle of it's basically what draws the snake into the garden, or one of the mechanisms anyway.
Mm-hmm. It's in a more literal note. It's like everything you do will affect the future in some way. So it's not like
not to sound too hippie, but basically like we're all more connected than we probably want to believe.
Well, I mean, it's irresponsible to think you're separate from everything else, to think you're above it.
I just glanced at the chat and someone brought up an interesting question. Is it truly selfish to want to control your life? And it depends on the context. It depends on what kind of ideology you want to believe in, because let's say you are given a choice that, let's say there's an apocalyptic event coming. You can prevent it, but you have to sacrifice a part of yourself to prevent it.
Exactly, yeah.
But if you deny, say you refuse, is that truly selfish? And that's a very hard question to answer. If you are, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of people would say so, because you have the means to stop that apocalyptic event. But if you refuse because you have to give something of yourself, then I'd say that's inherently, selfish, because you are given the tools to fix it. You're just unwilling.
That's literally the freaking story of Cain and Abel. Abel makes all the appropriate sacrifices and he succeeds. Cain doesn't, and he flounders around and becomes bitter and resentful and hateful because of it. And that story repeats. Not even just in the Old and New Testaments, but other myths too. Like this idea that you have to sacrifice a part of yourself, That's basically the idea. That's what Minda does in Twilight Princess. Except it's a little more on the head in Twilight Princess. She literally tries to sacrifice her life, just towards some greater good. That's the ultimate act of giving up ego, I guess you could say. She turns into the spider. She embodies the part of chaos. She pulls out the spear and she tries to smite Ganon.
Doesn't quite work, but she tried.
But and the fact that she tried, it led to a good, and that's why she quote unquote is resurrected in a more refined and pure form.
Yeah. By the river.
She's burned away all the negative aspects that she was holding on to of her personality, which I guess you could say is visually represented by the fact that she's an imp, and she has been quote unquote reborn as a more better person, and that's why she appears in a more true form after that whole ordeal. I love Twilight Princess. It's such a great game.
It boils down to the if you're given a role and that role is crucial for you for the play, then you have free will, so you can choose not to play it. And you can tell them that, I'm my own person and I'm going to, do my own choices. But at the end of the day, then you have to deal with the consequences. And that's the point of, Zelda. You could say that, let's say it's not selfish. She's just trying to, let's say, control her own destiny or her own fate. And, but at the end of the day, then she has to deal with the consequences, which she does when she realizes that because she was, she prioritized herself over what she was expected to do, she had to deal with the consequences, namely her family and friends dying, and her kingdom in ruins. That's the consequences of her choice. And then again, she makes a new decision that my own selfish desires are not worth me losing, everything I love.
And mind you, in like a lot of religion, the whole point is finding your place in the cosmic scale. It's not like
that's really like blatant in like Taoism.
Yeah, and it's a huge misinterpretation with religion, where finding your place means you have to, put yourself into this tube, into this narrow tube that you just have to fit into. And the point of Hinduism, why there's like over 33 million gods, is there's a place for everyone. There's a role that anyone can fulfill. It's the fact that people are so selfish and want to, take command of their own life in a sure way that leads to their despair. There's a god of like rice, there's a god of an obscure river, and there's stuff that's like a god of ocean to gods of the universe itself. There's a different archetype that anyone can encompass. You just gotta swallow your pride and let yourself be the best you can be. But most people won't even take the first step. It has to be their idea,
And basically, that's the concept of ego.
Yeah, the concept of ego. Zelda wants to find her own way, but she doesn't even know what her way is.
Which is why she's aimless, and again, that's reflected in the gameplay itself. The game is completely open-ended. There's no direction. You just go wherever. If that's intentional, then I actually have to say, kudos to Nintendo if that was all intentional.
I mean, you can make this even more meta, and the way you can do that is just look at, the Breath of the Wild is a game, a product of Japanese culture, and for Japanese culture is a lot less individual focused than the Western. In Japanese culture, you're expected to play your part. That is how it is, and when you don't play your part, it causes discord.
Yes. Another form of chaos.
Yes, and that's reflected pretty well in the game. She has been. There are certain expectations to her as a person. However, due to her own, like we've been saying, selfish desires, she doesn't want to encompass or embody that. She doesn't want to take responsibility or do what is expected of her, which is a big taboo in Japanese culture. And you see, because she doesn't, initially, do that, it leads to catastrophe. And and that's pretty meta because you know that's very.
I mean, it
really
makes
fucking
sense that culture would, you know, manifest that thing because, you know, it was made in that culture, I guess. But
Yeah.
although it's kind of interesting because other games in the series, like Twilight Princess is way more Western than East. Like the Twilight Princess, you literally have like a miniature Jesus story in it. Like Midna, she has a visually portrayed death and resurrection on screen, and Zelda does too in the game too. Which I think we might have finally figured out how Zelda comes back at the end, even though she supposedly disappears.
Well, yeah, when you think of everything, especially Zelda, which is basically a bunch of stories being told again and again in a slightly different way, then the entire lore makes more sense. You know, it's one of the main reasons why no one in Dark Souls lore, again, complains about, like, why is it that technology doesn't progress? Because everything in Dark Souls, existence is cyclical. Time is a cycle. It just, I think that Dark Souls does a better job in illustrating that happening.
Yeah.
In Zelda, they give you the timeline.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem with Zelda is they actually, you know, they put out this book that. But it's funny because if you listen to the interviews with the developer, like Onima's just like, I don't tell the people on the team what point in the timeline this game takes place, because I don't think that's how they intended, you know, the games to be. I'm pretty sure they intended them to be cyclical, just like a myth or a religious story. Like,
well, didn't it come because demanding it? They were like spurging, demanding what went where, and then they gave them a timeline.
It's possible, or maybe
it was through pure pressure.
I think the entire Zelda timeline, as it was presented in Hyrule Story, is just a marketing ploy because you know they were trying to sell Skyward Sword as the origin story, and then obviously you would need a timeline to kind of, you know, show the fans where this, you know, placed in relation to that origin story.
Yeah.
Turns out the origin story you were promised is not an origin story, so you know.
No, because time is cyclical in Hyrule, just like every religion and every myth. There isn't a start or end point. It's an endless cycle where things repeat in different forms because of the individuals that embody things. So
to answer the question, Skyward Sword is still that bad. I will still say Skyward Sword is that bad. We'll die on that top. Yes, it has more going for it, but it could have told that story better.
Yeah. I actually think Breath of the Wild does a way better job at, you know, articulating its message and themes. Even though I'm not necessarily always a fan of those themes, I can respect what it's going for. And like I was talking to, you know, what we were talking about, Neph, earlier, is that, you know, even though we're not a fan of the melancholy that they're trying to present, it's still like the theme. It's very different from everything else we've seen in the Zelda series. You know, it's not bombastic and, you know, necessarily super epic, but it's the theme is still there. You know, we're basically looking at Hyrule directly after order has been broken.
Yes.
That's literally what we're doing. The garden has been burnt down, and what we're playing is right after that.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, the story of rebuilding is not necessarily very interesting, but that is all subjective. But it's still.
Yeah, and again, that same story is in like all the religions. Like in the, I think I talked about earlier in the New Testament and Revelations. There is this established order. A serpentine, you know, a representative of chaos comes and destroys the chaos. Destroys the order, and then assuming the people from that cycle, you know, have properly played their parts or whatever, they will rise from that chaos and create a better order from it. And that's symbolized with the New Jerusalem, which is like this cube thing around the Garden of Eden. It's basically the Garden of Eden 2.0, and that cycle keeps repeating all throughout history. And if everyone plays their parts properly, after each time the order is destroyed, the next one will become better. It's almost like this self-corrective process that keeps happening. And it can go the opposite way, too. Things can get worse after the cycle, which is what happens in Breath of the Wild, because the traditions and the knowledge have been failed to be passed on. And this is why I think Majora's Mask is so loved, because Majora's Mask is basically a microcosm for this whole cycle concept. Like, you're literally reliving the cycle over and over again, and you're gaining knowledge with the destruction of Termina, or, you know, when you go back in time, you're using the knowledge from the previous cycle so that the next cycle is better. And that keeps going on and on and on until hypothetically you achieve some kind of perfect order, and, you know, everything's fine and the moon stopped or whatever.
Yeah, and that ties in like to a question in the chat that I saw. You know, is there a way for a cycle to end? And then that's a very hard question.
That's
and
hypothetical.
Certain religions kind of believe that that's the ideal, but at the same time, like you said, why would you break the cycle when it's a process about improving things? It's shitty for the
yeah.
people
The
that
fact
experience
if
it at
the
the
fact
time,
if
but
it starts or end is irrelevant. The point is, if you do this, things will be better next time. It goes into this idea of how to interpret this stuff. They're not literal historical events, and these are not literal characters, with dates and stuff. Although Tolkien injected that into his stuff, but I'll get to that in a second. They're patterns of being that you can act out yourself and you experience in your life. Everyone experiences like the story of the Garden of Eden at some point. Everyone has that moment when they realize they're naked. Everyone has that moment when some element of chaos comes into their home, or their conscious perception of their garden and ruins it, and they lose their innocence and they understand the idea of good and evil. Everyone has that moment where they're exiled from that stability, unless they're kept in like perpetual childhood or something, which unless they're like a man child or something.
You could already say that growing up is,
and that's why the name Adam is used. It means all of man. It's something everyone experiences. It's not a literal person.
Yeah.
And that's how all and this is not just in Christianity, this is in all religions, that's why all the characters in like the Old Testament and stuff, their names mean their function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they're not necessarily they might be based on a historical person, but they're principalities, they're ideas that anyone can embody. And it's the same thing in the Legend of Zelda. Link and Zelda and Ganondorf, they're all principalities that anyone in Hyrule can embody at some point and act it out. And that's how all people saw the world before like the 20th century. They all saw the world kind of like this. It's like kind of like a weird meta actor stage, and you're like an actor in some sort of cosmic play. That's how everyone saw it, and that's been completely lost in the 20th. Well, not completely lost, obviously, but on a civilization scale, it's been lost. Yeah, that's it, meta-divine narrative. On a civilization scale, it's been lost, but obviously the knowledge is still around, or we wouldn't be talking about it.
I just want to I want to address, while we're on the topic, we're really good questions. So someone in the chat asking, but in Breath of the Wild the Master Sword is weakened, and I believe Calamity Ganon isn't Ganon. So I'm thinking, is the cycle starting to fade away to the point where it's just stops? And that's the thing, like it doesn't need to be Ganon. Ganon is not, like we were talking about earlier. This is a hierarchy of principalities. Ganon is just a tier of that principality of malice or demise, whatever you would prefer.
I personally think it's malice, but as far as what's actually been stated in the games, demise is at the top of the chaotic hierarchy. But I personally think it's malice.
Malice
I agree with you
is way above demise.
But
I think it predates demise. Demise is just a face. But
even then, you could say demise is the one embodying.
Whoa, Windwanker, your mic is exploding. What is going on with this mic?
Oh dear Lord, no!
Oh, there, we could hear you again. You went in robot mode, and then it got all super slow motion.
What I was going to say. Sorry. What I was going to say quickly is that it's more because what my status is that an incarnation of my hatred will forever follow your kind, and it doesn't specify it needs to be him. It's just that it's that malice.
There'll always be a person in the world who will embody that role, basically.
Yeah,
is what it's saying.
That could be anyone. All the villains we've seen in Zelda are fulfilling that role. Even Body.
Even like a random schmuck like Chancellor Cole.
Yeah, they're all embodying that malice. So Ganon is not needed for the play. All that is needed is character that embodies that.
Ganon's just probably like the most refined form of that, I guess, in the minds of the people of Hyrule, I guess you could say. Which is probably why they use him as a symbol to represent this idea of malice, because it's just like, how, the Egyptians use Apophis to represent chaos, or, in Norse mythology, it's Jormungandr, however it's pronounced. Like, Ganon is basically just Hyrule's version, or Hyrule's visual symbol for this idea of someone who embodies chaos, and it's the strongest one in their culture.
Yeah.
I mean, even in Gnosticism, the the Christian god is reimagined as a serpent figure called the Demiurge, and it is a serpent figure that sort of takes reality and bastardizes it into a false shadow reality. So these symbols are constantly getting used over and over again. Even in very obtuse religions.
Yeah, and again, the point isn't how, what the actual mechanisms of this whole abstract thing is. The point is, it exists, and that's how our consciousness perceives the world. We're not literal beings. Our brains are basically hyper advanced pattern recognition engines, and it's not just physical. We don't just recognize physical patterns. We recognize abstract ones too.
Yeah.
The brain is pretty damn impressive.
And I like what I was gonna say that I think the best way to look at it is a screenplay, and you can imagine that they're putting up a play. They're gonna act out the Legend of Zelda, and literally in the script, or in the casting call, it's like, yeah, we need a villain, and we need a princess, and we need a hero, and it doesn't really matter who those actors are as long as they can embody those.
They just find the person and that even happens in Twilight Princess when Link runs into the spirit, and the spirit's like, oh, I found the actor, I found the guy who most embodies the idea of Link. Here's the green outfit. Here you go. Have fun. Enjoy the play. Bring your own part to the play.
But yeah, it's like, I think all the villains in Zelda are
and Link is learning how to play the part from the hero shade.
Yeah.
Which is his tradition or his connection to the past. So
Jake Singer says something really funny where he says, I think the cyclical nature of myths are being reflected in this podcast. You guys are repeating yourselves quite a lot. Yes.
Yeah, I think we are. So maybe we should wrap this up then, unless there's any final thoughts you guys have.
Nah, I was just gonna say that this stuff is super complicated, so it's very easy to lose track of where you are and what you're saying, and it's also easy to forget what you mentioned because
we're starting to think cyclically now, so we're just repeating ourselves in slightly different forms.
We are Yorm again. We are the Ouroboros snake eating.
Oh no, we become trapped in the cycle of order and chaos, and now there's no escape.
All 26 of you watchers are going to be trapped with us too. 25 now. They're trying to escape.
Yeah, this is like a meta, Majora's Mask.
Well, it's it's like Tolkien and other people say, like, language shapes the way you think. So great. Now I know I have a few words of vocabulary, and this language is symbolism. So now I'm gonna freaking start thinking this way, and I'm gonna start thinking in cycles and repeating myself. If there's any truth to that, anyway.
Yeah, but I guess we could wrap it up. I think we've touched on everything we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else we haven't talked about. I've come to appreciate an aspect of Breath of all the Zelda games, even except I think Hyrule Warriors is the only one I haven't quite figured out with these tools, but
I think that's
no one knows what's going on with that game at all.
Yeah,
nobody knows.
I still think they got a bad voice actress to play Princess Zelda. I still think I don't really like the ice cream graphics, but the core thing that matters, like the thing that drove me away from it most, which was this contradiction or whatever. That all makes sense to me now, and it's kind of ironic. I was like Princess Zelda. This tradition of how to interpret myths was never passed on to me, and I was becoming frustrated and hateful of this thing I loved because I didn't know how to interpret it, and it just seemed like a jumbled mess to me. But I
C.S. Lewis.
Huh? What about C.S. Lewis?
Your school was King Rowan.
Yes.
you were told to play something and appreciate something, but it didn't equip you with the necessary tools to understand.
And I found things to appreciate in Breath of the Wild and Skyward Sword, A Link Between Worlds, and I haven't played Triforce Heroes, but I'm gonna try and find something in it one day maybe. I don't know.
It's like. No, just stay away from that game. Do yourself a service. Like, I'll admit that I've been enlightened to a lot of stuff that I didn't think about, but Triforce Heroes still remains like shit.
It looks like it, but you never know. I don't know. 2 weeks ago, I was under the mindset that I there was no way I could find reconciliation with something like Skyward Sword, and here I am, like, baffled, like, oh wow, I see logic here now that when there was none. So I don't have anything else to add if you guys don't, so I think we probably wrap it up here. I really enjoyed that stream. Good. Let's bring an end to this cycle.
Yeah. Good night, you guys. Hope you enjoyed the chat.
I'm gonna go off and finish the rest of the animation over the next few days.
Yeah, I'm always open to doing a podcast. It's really fun, so I'm always open to it.
Yeah, if you guys enjoyed this, let us know, and we'll try and find another topic to come back to next month. I think Adam and I want to talk about Project Cursed at some point. It's been over 10 years since that. None of you probably know what that is, but Adam and I want to reminisce about a little blight in our past. So that might be the next topic for him and I. But anyway,
hey, Times Menagerie commentary win.
Oh no, I'll never go back to those.
Yes, commentary win.
I'll probably just be bitching the whole time, like, what the hell drugs was I on? What was I thinking? What principality was possessing me to make this?
The principality of nostalgia.
Oh god. Anyway,
nothing will be funnier than when, after you beat that game, Nephy thanks Miyamoto for creating an epic game series.
Well, I made that game before I had this sort of... I made that game before Skyward Sword and all of this came out. I made that game before I had this kind of... this disconnect with the series, if I could put it that way. Because I felt really alienated and stuff, and now it's like, okay, now... I have found my... I guess you could say the Princess Zelda in the series that's kind of drawing me back into it, like, highly...
I think that's the most important thing to bring from all of this. That even though, like, you guys in chat, I don't know if you guys think we were just, rambling crazy people, but at the end of the day, the most important things when you consume whatever medium is to find something you appreciate in it. Yeah. And it doesn't. If that makes you more appreciate whatever you want, whatever, even if it's a book series, a game, franchise, it doesn't really matter. But as long as you find an aspect of it that you can appreciate, that's the most important thing. And even if other people think it's dumb or meaningless, that doesn't really matter because it's up to you to.
Yeah, just as long as you find something you like, other people say. But if they don't like it, they're not you.
Yeah, I made this analogy because we've been talking so much in the Principality, channel in Discord. Is that I feel like it's kind of like being back in middle school, or high school or whatever, where in the English class you had to analyze a poem. And most of the students in the class would be like, oh my god, not this again. And there would always be those, I was one of those kids that would be like, oh, this is really funny. I love this. I love symbolism and, analyzing literature.
I get that.
And, I didn't hate those other kids. I could kind of see where they were coming from. Like, they probably thought it was boring as fuck. And that's, that's completely valid as well.
Anyways,
so I guess to wrap this up, Breath of the Wild is not that bad. It's actually got it has a little bit of a spirit to it.
If you like Skyward Sword, you're a fucking moron. Kill yourself.
I have things I appreciate in Skyward Sword. I'll leave it at that.
Die.
Leave my presence.
And I guess
that's okay.
Another thing I just mention quick is that if you guys find all this thing this topic interesting, we're constantly discussing and talking about it in the Discord, so feel free to join and say hi.
Yeah, we have a whole section of Discord now called Principalities. There's if you want to look up videos and stuff on YouTube. One person who seems really knowledgeable in this stuff, his name's Jonathan Paggio, or it's Paggio, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. He's this French Canadian guy who's just he's clearly well educated in all of this symbology nonsense. On a lesser scale, there's this guy called Jordan Peterson who's been talking about this stuff. So it's starting to sprout up all over the internet from various sources now. So
yeah, and
I'd recommend starting with Jonathan Paggio.
Yeah, and if you even want to take a step further, I don't know, when you mentioned it that he studied theology, there is a lot of this in the in academics.
At least in Europe, I haven't encountered any of it in America.
Oh, I would like to recommend some stories too, if you're interested in talks of archetypes and principalities. I recommend Gate of the Silver Key by H.P. Lovecraft, Sandman by Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman clearly knows this shit. You introduced me to American Gods the other day, and I'm like, holy crap, this is this is a modern form of this idea.
And American Gods, the show or a comic, either one of those will work, and you can get where the thought process is.
And maybe if you want to be like if you want to be more scholarly, I can recommend reading the Poetic Edda, which is basically a primary source of all of Norse mythology, and it touches upon a lot of the stuff we've been talking about.
And Tolkien
and it's a very good read.
Tolkien and C.S. Lewis talk about this stuff in their letters to each other. I don't know how I missed this, because I love Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and I always have. In the last 2 weeks, like I've been reading like C.S. Lewis's Miracles and stuff, and there's conversations between him and Tolkien Tolkien's just saying it right there. He's just like, don't view these myths as like, you know, just some kind of lie with all this fancy imagery. View it as like an idea that's been given like these symbolic images, you know, to represent something. And like both of them, they didn't see other religions as like 100% false or whatever. They saw them as like fragmented forms of some kind of reality of existence or whatever. So they saw it as like some religions are more true than others, rather than, you know, this is the correct one and all these. Yeah, we're going back to the cycle. Let's edit here. I'm hitting stop recording. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you had a good time.
All right.
I think we stopped recording. Yep. Okay, it should have stopped now. Well, that was fun, and now I actually have a headache because I've been talking so much. I'm gonna need to take some ibuprofen.
I have a fucking headache too.
Sorry for my mic, by the way.
That's okay.
Oh, it's okay, dude.
Windwanker's had a lot of technical problems too with his mic, but this time not so much. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I walked into another room, and I realized just walking out of my room helped. So, you know.
Yeah. I think it says we're still live.
Are we still live?
Are we still live?
Yeah, I think we're still live.
Okay, no. Yeah, we're still live, even though I've stopped recording. Bye, everyone.